My name is Liam, 33 years old, and yesterday I stood in the center of a living room I paid for while my family treated me like garbage to be taken out. At my feet sat 4 black trash bags containing every piece of clothing I owned. My own mother tossed my house keys into the wastebasket while my ex-wife sipped my expensive wine on the sofa, laughing with my sister. They thought kicking me out when I was down would break me. They had no idea that their betrayal just handed me the keys to my own empire, and that within a month I would be the one holding the deed to their destruction. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been stabbed in the back by the people who were supposed to protect you. The rain was hammering against the large bay windows of the house I had spent 5 years turning into a home. The air inside felt suffocating and heavy with unspoken resentments. Standing by the front door were my parents, Richard and Patricia. They wore expressions so cold and indifferent, you would think they were waiting for a delivery driver to leave rather than evicting their own son. Patricia did not even look me in the eye as she dropped my house keys into the metal wastebasket with a sharp clink that echoed through the silent room. On my custom leather sofa sat Monica, the woman I had been married to until our brutal divorce was finalized just last month. She was casually swirling a glass of my reserve Cabernet, leaning comfortably against my younger sister Stephanie. Stephanie was 30 years old and the undeniable golden child of our family. She had never worked a hard day in her life, yet she always got everything she wanted. Right now, what she wanted was my house. Footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor behind me. Jamal, Stephanie's husband, swaggered into the room. Jamal was a 32-year-old African-American man with a silver tongue and an endless supply of designer suits. He marketed himself as a visionary tech entrepreneur, though his startups only ever seemed to consume money rather than generate it. My parents absolutely worshipped his smooth-talking charm and believed every word of his fabricated success. Jamal crossed his arms and looked around the living room with a proprietary smirk. "This space is going to be perfect," he announced, addressing my parents instead of me. "The natural light is exactly what we need for the new headquarters of my startup. We are bringing in investors next week, and this property screams success." I stared at him, the sheer audacity of it making my blood boil. "You are turning my home into a fake office for a company that does not exist," I said, my voice dangerously calm despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. Stephanie scoffed, rolling her eyes as she adjusted her posture on the sofa. "Do not be so bitter, Liam. It is not your home anymore. You put the deed in the family trust 5 years ago. You do not own it. Mom and Dad are the trustees, and they decided Jamal and I need it more for our business ventures. What does a divorced broke guy need with a massive 4-bedroom house anyway?" Her words were a masterclass in twisting the truth. When my career was just starting out, I had placed the house in a family trust for tax purposes and basic liability protection. It was a naive mistake born of youthful trust in my parents. I thought family would always have my back. Instead, they waited until I was bleeding to strike the final blow. During my divorce, Monica had ruthlessly stripped my visible bank accounts, leaving my day-to-day finances looking completely drained. My parents saw me reeling and financially weak. Rather than helping me stand back up, Richard and Patricia used their legal power over the trust to manipulate the deed, effectively evicting me to hand the property over to their precious daughter and her fast-talking husband. "You are literally stealing the house I bought," I said, looking directly at my father. "I made every single mortgage payment. I paid for the renovations. I built those kitchen cabinets with my own hands." Richard finally spoke, his voice carrying that familiar tone of disappointed authority. "We are restructuring family assets, Liam. Jamal is on the verge of a major breakthrough with his application development. He needs a prestigious location to secure venture capital. You are single now. Your career as a supply chain data analyst is completely stagnant. You have no need for a property of this magnitude. It is just practical business. Practical business, I repeated numbly. My own father was kicking me out into the rain so his son-in-law could play pretend executive. Monica let out a high melodic laugh from the couch. She took another sip of wine, looking at me with pure disdain. Let us be honest, Liam. You always were a bit of a failure. You are boring, you are predictable, and now you are practically homeless. I am just glad I got my share of the money before you completely hit rock bottom. The sheer cruelty of my ex-wife teaming up with my own sister to celebrate my downfall was suffocating. They genuinely believed I was destroyed. They saw my emptied checking accounts and my quiet demeanor and assumed I was a defeated man. Jamal stepped closer to me, invading my personal space. He pulled a thick money clip from his designer jacket pocket. He peeled off a crisp $100 bill and threw it directly at my chest. The paper fluttered and landed on one of the black trash bags at my feet. Take an Uber to a homeless shelter, man, Jamal said, a look of pure pity on his face. Or find a cheap motel. Just get out of here. You are depressing my future investors. The room went completely silent. Everyone watched me, waiting for me to scream, to break down, to beg for mercy. They wanted the satisfaction of my complete humiliation. They wanted me to shatter. I looked down at the $100 bill resting on the plastic trash bag. I did not yell. I did not cry. I slowly bent down and picked up the bill, folding it neatly and sliding it into my pocket. I looked at Jamal, then at Monica Stephanie, and finally my parents. I let a slow, cold smirk spread across my face. Thank you for the ride money, Jamal, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but echoing clearly in the tense room. Enjoy the house. Without another word, I picked up 2 of the trash bags, pushed open the front door, and walked out into the pouring rain. I did not look back. I did not need to. They thought they had just ruined my life, but they had no idea what was actually waiting for me in the shadows. The rain slammed against the windshield of my sedan as I drove away from the neighborhood that used to be mine. I headed straight for the industrial edge of town, pulling into the cracked asphalt parking lot of the Starlight Inn. The neon sign above the office sputtered in the downpour, missing half its letters. I paid for a single night with a worn credit card, ignoring the suspicious glare of the night clerk. The room smelled distinctly of stale smoke and damp carpet. A single bulb flickered overhead, casting long shadows against the peeling wallpaper. I dropped my 4 black trash bags onto the stained floor and sat on the edge of a mattress that groaned under my weight. My phone vibrated aggressively in my pocket. I pulled it out to find a barrage of notifications lighting up the screen. They were all from Monica. My ex-wife was apparently not satisfied with merely watching me get thrown out into the storm. She wanted to twist the knife deep into my back. I opened the messages and stared at a series of high-resolution photos. There she was, standing proudly in the exact kitchen I had spent 3 months remodeling by hand. She was leaning against the quartz island holding up a crystal flute filled with the vintage champagne I had been saving for a special occasion. Next to her stood Stephanie and Jamal, flashing triumphant smiles. Jamal had his arm thrown around my sister, raising a glass in a mock toast. The caption beneath the final photo read exactly as I knew it would. This is what happens when you are a boring supply chain analyst. Winners take all. I stared at the glowing screen for a long, silent moment. A normal man in my position would have thrown the phone against the wall. A normal man would have screamed in sheer frustration, completely shattered by the cruelty of his own flesh and blood, teaming up with the woman who broke his heart. But I felt absolutely no anger. Instead, a cold, sharp sense of anticipation washed over my body. I placed the phone face down on the cheap nightstand, silencing the endless stream of toxic notifications. I unzipped the front pocket of my soaked backpack and carefully pulled out my laptop. The casing was heavily scratched and dented, covered in faded stickers to make it look entirely worthless. Monica had laughed at this machine repeatedly during our marriage, calling it a piece of junk fitting for a dead-end corporate drone. Her high-priced divorce lawyers had barely glanced at it during the asset discovery phase. They saw my modest salary, standard employee benefits, and depleted checking accounts. They assumed they had taken every last dime I possessed. They were all incredibly, fatally wrong. I was not just a boring supply chain analyst. For the past 3 years, while Monica was out spending my paycheck on designer clothes and expensive dinners, I was awake until 4 in the morning, typing complex lines of code. While my parents and sister mocked my perceived lack of ambition at family holidays, I was quietly building a highly advanced machine learning predictive data algorithm. It was designed to predict and optimize global shipping routes during severe disruptions. It was a revolutionary piece of software that could save international shipping conglomerates hundreds of millions of dollars in wasted fuel and lost cargo time. When Monica demanded the divorce and initiated her ruthless campaign to strip my assets, I knew exactly what I had to do. I immediately froze all negotiations regarding the software. I intentionally stalled the final stages of a massive corporate acquisition, playing the role of the depressed, overwhelmed husband flawlessly. I let her aggressive legal team tear through my surface-level finances. I let them take the car, the savings, and a significant portion of my monthly income without a fight. I made myself look completely broke and entirely defeated, so my true life's work would remain hidden deep in the shadows, untouched by her hands. My family saw my orchestrated weakness and pounced, eager to hand my house over to a fraud like Jamal. They all fell for the illusion beautifully. I connected the battered laptop to the motel's unsecured wireless network, routing my connection through a heavily encrypted virtual private network. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the standard operating system and launching a hidden, secure browser. I opened my encrypted email portal and saw the message I had been waiting for all evening. It was from the lead acquisition attorney at one of the largest logistics corporations in Silicon Valley. The subject line simply read, "Documents executed." I opened the attached files with bated breath. There, glowing brightly on the screen, were the final, legally binding acquisition documents. The signatures from the Silicon Valley executives were finalized, stamped, and verified. They had officially purchased total rights to my predictive algorithm. My heart hammered against my ribs, echoing loudly in the quiet, damp motel room. I minimized the document viewer and opened my offshore banking portal. The screen loaded slowly, the spinning icon reflecting in my eyes. I carefully navigated to my primary holding account. This was the account Monica's aggressive lawyers had never found. The page refreshed. The account balance, which had sat at a humble $412 for the past 60 days, flickered for a fraction of a second. The numbers shifted, expanding across the screen in bold green text. $12,500,000. I closed the laptop gently. Outside, the heavy rain continued to beat steadily against the cheap glass of the motel window. I was sitting in a damp room that smelled strongly of mildew, surrounded by trash bags, but I had just never felt more powerful. I was a multi-millionaire. My toxic family had absolutely no idea the storm that was about to hit them. The next morning, I woke up before the sun even cleared the horizon. The cheap motel mattress had done my back no favors, but the energy coursing through my veins made physical discomfort irrelevant. I showered, put on a clean shirt, and walked outside. I left the bags sitting on the stained carpet. I would not be needing those old clothes anymore. My first stop was not a luxury real estate office. It was a sleek glass and steel high-rise in the downtown financial district. I walked through the polished marble lobby, ignoring the skeptical glances from security. I took the private elevator straight to the top floor, stepping into the immaculate reception area of Sterling Financial Legal Group. Mr. Sterling was an attorney who catered exclusively to high net worth individuals. He stood up from his massive oak desk the moment his assistant ushered me into his corner office. He took one look at my worn-out jacket and offered a knowing smile. "The transaction cleared," Liam Sterling said, shaking my hand firmly. "Congratulations, you are officially our newest top-tier client." I sat down in the plush leather chair opposite him. "Thank you," I replied, my voice steady. "But we do not have time to celebrate today. I need you to look into a specific property." I gave him the exact address of the home I had built, the one my parents had just thrown me out of. "I need to know exactly what legal loopholes Richard and Patricia used to manipulate the family trust. I need to understand how they handed my house to my sister without triggering a review." Sterling nodded, his fingers flying across his keyboard as he accessed private municipal and financial databases. For several minutes, the only sound in the room was the rapid clicking of keys. Then he stopped. He leaned closer to the monitor, his brow furrowing in deep concentration. A sharp, incredulous laugh escaped his lips. "Liam," Sterling said, turning the large monitor so I could clearly see the screen, "your parents did not just find a loophole to transfer the deed to Jamal. They committed absolute financial suicide to make this happen." I leaned forward, scanning the highlighted legal filings. My jaw tightened as the reality of their sheer arrogance became crystal clear. In their desperate rush to fund Jamal and his imaginary technology startup, my parents had not just gifted the property outright. They had actively used the house as collateral to secure a massive, high-risk commercial loan. Traditional banks had completely rejected their funding applications because Jamal had zero credit history. So Richard and Patricia had turned to a private shadow lending firm to get the cash. "They took out $1.5 million, Sterling explained, tracing the digital document with his pen. "They leveraged the entire equity of the property you paid for. And Liam, the terms of this loan are absolutely brutal. They agreed to an 18% interest rate. This is predatory lending at its finest. The contract includes an incredibly aggressive acceleration clause. If Jamal misses a single monthly payment, the entire principal balance becomes due immediately. If they cannot pay, the lender has the right to initiate an expedited foreclosure and completely seize the property within 30 days. I stared at the glowing screen, my mind racing through the implications. My parents had risked everything, including their own financial stability, to bankroll a smooth-talking con artist. "What is Jamal actually doing with the cash right now?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. Sterling quickly pulled up a secondary financial tracking report that monitored the corporate account. "He is burning through it faster than anyone could ever imagine," he replied, his tone dripping with professional disgust. "In the last 48 hours alone, he has leased 2 luxury sports cars, booked an extravagant suite at a downtown hotel for a launch party, and spent thousands on designer clothes and high-end dinners. There is absolutely zero capital being allocated to actual software development hiring or engineering. He is aggressively using the commercial loan as a personal slush fund to play the role of a wealthy corporate executive." A profound sense of total clarity washed over me. I had spent the entire drive to the office wondering how I was going to battle them in family court. I had mentally prepared myself for months of agonizing legal warfare and toxic mediation sessions with Monica Stephanie and my parents. But looking at the catastrophic financial disaster they had willingly created for themselves, I realized I did not need to step foot inside a family courtroom. They had confidently built a fragile house of cards on top of a ticking time bomb. "They are going to default very soon," I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. "Jamal is going to drain that business account dry, trying to maintain his fake, lavish lifestyle. He will never be able to cover an 18% interest rate on a $1.5 million principal balance. Sterling nodded in absolute agreement. The shadow lender will initiate foreclosure proceedings the very second a monthly payment bounces. I looked out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city down below. I did not want some random private lending firm taking back the house I built. I wanted to be the one holding the heavy axe when it finally dropped. I turned back to Sterling, my decision firm and absolute. I want to buy their entire debt, I said, locking eyes with my attorney. Sterling paused, a look of profound respect crossing his sharp features. You want to purchase the commercial loan directly from the private lender, he stated. Exactly, I replied, my voice hard and commanding. Contact the shadow lending firm today. Offer them a premium to buy out the contract in full. We will set up an anonymous holding company. When Jamal defaults, I want him answering directly to me. Within 48 hours, Apex Asset Management LLC was officially incorporated in the state of Delaware. Sterling moved with the kind of ruthless efficiency you only get when you are paying a retainer equivalent to the price of a luxury sports car. We structured the holding company behind thick layers of corporate veils, utilizing registered agents and nominee directors to ensure my name would never appear on any public registry. As far as the world was concerned, Apex Asset Management was just another faceless, heavily funded corporate entity looking to swallow up high-yield commercial debt. The private shadow lending firm that had originally given my parents the money was more than happy to wash their hands of Jamal. Sterling contacted them under the guise of an aggressive debt acquisition portfolio manager. When we offered them a 5% premium to buy out the $1.5 million loan in full, they executed the transfer without asking a single question. I sat in Sterling's office and watched the wire transfer process in real time. The digital confirmation appeared on the screen, a sterile green checkmark that finalized the massive transaction. I was no longer the discarded son. I was no longer the boring supply chain analyst who had been tossed out into the rain with trash bags. Legally, entirely, and without a shadow of a doubt, I was now my own family's sole creditor. They were living in a house I effectively owned, spending money that was legally bound to my anonymous company, and dancing on a trapdoor that I held the remote control to open. While Sterling finalized the mountains of legal paperwork I had to endure, a completely different kind of warfare. I had relocated to a high-end, fully furnished luxury penthouse downtown, paying the 6-month lease in cash. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, a stark contrast to the damp motel room from my first night. I sat on my new Italian leather sofa, sipping an imported dark roast coffee, and watched the digital torture my family was broadcasting to the world. My phone lit up with an alert. Stephanie had just gone live on Instagram. I mirrored my phone to the massive flat-screen television mounted on my living room wall, watching the destruction of my past unfold in high definition. Stephanie was holding her phone high-strutting through the kitchen I had meticulously renovated. Her face was flushed with the thrill of spending money she did not earn. Behind her, a crew of unbothered contractors were wielding sledgehammers and crowbars. I watched my face, completely devoid of emotion, as a contractor swung a heavy mallet directly into the custom oak cabinets I had built with my own hands. The beautiful wood splintered and cracked, crashing to the floor in jagged pieces. Out with the old and boring, Stephanie cheered to her audience of a few hundred followers. She flipped the camera around to show a stack of massive, gaudy marble slabs resting against my former dining room wall. We are completely upgrading this kitchen, she bragged. Jamal said a successful tech CEO cannot host investors in a house that looks like a cheap suburban cabin. We are putting in imported Italian marble. Winners surround themselves with winning aesthetics. Monica, my ex-wife, suddenly leaned into the camera frame. She was holding a mimosa, wearing a designer tracksuit. She smirked directly into the lens, knowing perfectly well I might be watching. "It is amazing what a little vision and actual money can do to a place," Monica said, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "Some people just settle for mediocrity. We do not." I did not throw the remote. I did not scream. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the rich, bitter taste on my tongue. They were tearing down solid oak to put up cheap, flashy marble that they were paying for with an 18% interest loan they could never afford. It was the perfect metaphor for their entire existence. Fake, hollow, and rapidly hurtling toward total collapse. My phone buzzed again, vibrating against the glass coffee table. This time it was not a social media alert. It was a voicemail notification from Patricia. I played the audio out loud, the sound of my mother's voice filling my vast, empty penthouse. "Liam, Patricia," began her tone, carrying that familiar, impatient edge. "I know you are probably busy figuring out your living situation, but I need you to do something for me. Jamal is having the contractors install a commercial-grade refrigerator today, and we cannot find the warranty paperwork for the old oven you bought last year. We are trying to sell it online to cover some landscaping costs. Check your emails and forward those warranty receipts to Stephanie immediately. Do not make this difficult. We are very busy." The message clicked off. There was no inquiry about whether I had found a place to sleep. There was no concern about whether I had money for food. My mother had actively participated in rendering me homeless, and her only concern was extracting a few $100s from an appliance I had purchased with my own hard-earned salary. The sheer, blinding audacity of the request was staggering. I channeled every ounce of anger, every bit of betrayal, into a state of pure, cold, calculated focus. I did not text her back. I did not forward the receipts. I picked up my phone and dialed Sterling. He answered on the first ring. "The paperwork is secured," Liam Sterling said smoothly. "You are officially the man behind the curtain." "Excellent," I replied, my voice hard and commanding. "I want you to prepare the automated late fee notices. Draft them with the most aggressive, unyielding corporate language legally permissible. I want the $5,000 penalty clause highlighted in bold red ink." "Understood," Sterling said. "When do we deploy?" "The first of the month is exactly 9 days away," I stated, looking back at the paused image of Stephanie and Monica laughing on my television screen. "Jamal is blowing his capital on sports cars and gaudy marble countertops. He will not make the $15,000 minimum payment. The second that deadline passes, hit them with the default notice." I ended the call and set the phone down. The trap was officially set, and the countdown had begun. They thought they had buried me, but they had merely handed me the shovel. 2 weeks passed in a blur of silent observation and strategic planning from the comfort of my penthouse. On a Tuesday morning, my phone lit up with a text message from Patricia. It was the first time she had reached out since demanding the appliance warranty receipts. The text was short and dripping with false maternal concern. "Liam let us meet for lunch at the Capitol Grill at 1 o'clock. I want to check on my boy." I knew exactly what this was. This was not a mother reaching out to heal a fractured relationship. This was a reconnaissance mission. I bypassed my closet full of newly tailored Italian suits and pulled out the same faded, worn-out jacket I had been wearing the night they threw me out into the rain. I drove my old sedan to the downtown restaurant, making sure to park several blocks away so no one would see me pull up. When I approached the host stand, the maitre d' looked me up and down with obvious disdain before leading me to a semi-private corner booth. The moment I turned the corner, the trap sprang exactly as I had anticipated. Patricia was not alone. Sitting around the pristine white tablecloth were Richard, Stephanie, and Jamal. They had already made themselves entirely comfortable. 2 empty bottles of sparkling water and a half-empty bottle of vintage Bordeaux were resting in the center of the table. Patricia smiled a thin, tight expression that did not reach her eyes. "Liam, you made it," Patricia said, gesturing to the empty chair at the end of the table. "Have a seat. We went ahead and ordered the appetizers." I sat down quietly, keeping my posture slightly slouched. I looked around the table, playing the role of the intimidated, broken son flawlessly. "This is a big group for a simple check-in," I said, keeping my voice low and devoid of energy. Richard folded his hands on the table, leaning forward with the unearned authority he always projected. "We are a family, Liam. We do things together. And frankly, we felt it was time to clear the air about the house situation. I know you were upset that night, but you need to understand that kicking you out was an act of tough love." "Tough love," I repeated, staring at my father. "Exactly," Richard continued, completely unbothered by his own hypocrisy. "Your career as a supply chain analyst has been entirely stagnant for years. You were too comfortable in that house. You lacked hunger. We needed to push you out of your comfort zone to motivate you. Sometimes a man needs to hit rock bottom to figure out how to climb back up. Handing the property to Jamal and Stephanie was just the catalyst you needed to take a hard look at your life." The waiter arrived, interrupting my father's ridiculous monologue. Jamal and Stephanie ordered the dry-aged bone-in ribeye, while Richard and Patricia opted for the imported Chilean sea bass. When the waiter looked at me, I ordered a plain house salad and a glass of tap water. Jamal chuckled, a deep, condescending sound that grated on my nerves. Jamal leaned back in the plush leather booth and casually adjusted his shirt cuff. The movement was deliberately slow, designed entirely to show off the massive, diamond-encrusted luxury watch gleaming on his left wrist. I recognized the brand instantly. It was a limited edition piece that retailed for nearly $80,000. My parents had leveraged the roof over their heads at an 18% interest rate so this clown could buy shiny toys to stroke his massive ego. "Listen, Liam," Jamal said, resting his forearms on the table. "Your dad is right. You need a push. I have been talking with Stephanie, and we feel bad for you, man. Truly. You are out there struggling, probably sleeping on a buddy's couch, and my new tech startup is just exploding with potential. We are securing major capital. I am a generous guy, so I want to offer you a lifeline." I looked up from my empty plate. "What kind of lifeline?" "A job," Jamal replied, flashing a brilliant, utterly fake smile. "My schedule is getting crazy. I need a personal assistant. Someone to handle my calendar, pick up my dry cleaning, fetch my coffee, and drive me to executive meetings. I can offer you minimum wage to start. It is not glamorous, but it will help you get back on your feet. You can fetch my coffee, bro. Consider it a favor from your brother-in-law." Stephanie beamed at him, resting her hand on his shoulder. "Jamal is so incredibly generous, Liam. You really should take it. It beats whatever dead-end temporary work you are probably looking at right now." I stared at the gleaming diamond watch on Jamal's wrist. I thought about the $1.5 million commercial loan I secretly owned. I thought about the aggressive default notices Sterling had drafted, just waiting in the chamber for the moment Jamal missed his massive monthly payment. "That is a very generous offer, Jamal," I said, making my voice sound small and deeply appreciative. "I am just blown away by your success. How do you even manage all the expenses for a startup like that? It must cost a fortune to host investors." Jamal swallowed the bait instantly. His chest puffed out, eager to brag to the peasant at the table. "It takes money to make money, Liam. Next weekend, we are throwing a massive, exclusive investor party at the house. We are bringing in a private chef, a string quartet, the works. I am actually opening up 3 new high-limit corporate credit cards tomorrow just to float the catering and event design. You have to project overwhelming wealth if you want people to write you big checks. It is high-level business strategy. You would not understand." I understood perfectly. He was piling high-interest, unsecured credit card debt on top of a predatory commercial loan he was already failing to pay. He was literally digging his own financial grave with a golden shovel, and he was proud of it. I nodded slowly, maintaining my facade. You are right, Jamal. That is way over my head. I will definitely think about the assistant position. The expensive steaks and fish arrived. They ate like royalty, laughing and celebrating their imaginary wealth, while I silently picked at my dry house salad. I listened to them mock my old kitchen, complain about the contractors, and brag about their impending social status. I absorbed every insult, every condescending remark, and every laugh. Finally, the waiter returned and placed a small black leather book in the center of the table. The bill. Richard reached into his tailored jacket pocket. His hand stopped. A look of exaggerated confusion crossed his face. He patted his other pockets, then checked his trousers. Well, this is incredibly embarrassing, Richard announced, looking around the table. I seem to have completely forgotten my wallet at the house. Patricia, do you have your cards? Patricia gasped, softly touching her designer handbag. Oh no, I left my purse in the other car. Jamal, could you cover this? We will pay you back tonight. Jamal let out a heavy sigh, looking genuinely inconvenienced. Man, my new corporate cards do not arrive until tomorrow, and my personal accounts are tied up in the business transfer. He looked directly at me. Hey, Liam, you think you can spot us this time? It is the least you can do, after we gave you all this great career advice. I looked at the bill resting on the table. $412. They had orchestrated this entire lunch specifically to humiliate me, to make the supposedly broke son drain his last few dollars to feed them. It was a sick, twisted power play. I did not argue. I reached into my faded jacket pocket. I pulled out a handful of crumpled $20 bills I had brought specifically for this occasion. I smoothed them out on the table. Then I reached into my inner pocket and pulled out the crisp, perfectly folded $100 bill Jamal had thrown at my chest 2 weeks ago. I laid it on top of the pile. Keep the change, I told the waiter as he walked by. I stood up from the booth, looking at my family one last time. Thank you for the lunch, I said quietly. Enjoy the party next weekend. I walked out of the restaurant, stepping into the bright afternoon sun. Jamal was taking out new credit cards. The commercial loan payment was due in 5 days. The fuse was lit and the explosion was going to be spectacular. The afternoon sun felt warm against my face as I walked away from the restaurant. The air was thick with the city exhaust, but all I could smell was the sweet scent of impending victory. I had parked my faded sedan 4 blocks away in a crumbling municipal lot to ensure my family would not see me arrive. I jingled the keys in my pocket, my mind already running through the final stages of the foreclosure timeline. Just as I reached the driver's side door, the roar of a high-performance engine shattered the quiet of the parking garage. A brand-new, stark white Porsche SUV whipped around the concrete pillar, its tires squealing slightly, before slamming on the brakes directly behind my rusted rear bumper. It parked, aggressively boxing me in completely. The heavy driver's side door swung open, and out stepped Monica. She looked like she had just walked off the runway of a luxury fashion show. She was draped in a silk designer trench coat, her wrists heavy with gold bracelets that clinked loudly in the damp air of the garage. She pushed a pair of oversized, diamond-studded sunglasses up into her perfectly styled hair. This was the woman I had promised to spend the rest of my life with. The woman who had sworn in front of our friends and family to stand by my side through thick and thin. Instead, she had hired the most ruthless divorce attorneys in the state to strip me of everything I owned, and then joined forces with my toxic sister to celebrate my downfall. Well, look at this depressing sight, Monica said, leaning against the sleek hood of her leased Porsche. Her eyes scanned my faded jacket and the peeling paint of my 10-year-old sedan. Her lips curled into a sneer of pure disgust. Patricia texted me that you actually showed up to lunch wearing that garbage. I had to come see it for myself. I see you are still driving this absolute death trap. Where are you even sleeping these days, Liam? In the back seat? Or did you finally swallow your pride and check into a homeless shelter? I stood perfectly still, my hand resting on the handle of my car door. Why are you here, Monica? I asked, keeping my voice flat and defeated. The divorce is finalized. You got exactly what you wanted. You took the savings, you took the retirement accounts, you left me with nothing. There is literally nothing left for you to take. Monica laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the concrete walls. Oh, there is always something left to take, Liam. That is why I tracked you down. My lawyers sent over their final billing statement this morning, and it is higher than I anticipated. I need another $10,000 to clear the balance. I stared at her, genuinely taken aback by her sheer audacity. I do not have $10,000, Monica. You know exactly what my bank accounts look like. You drained them yourself. I am barely surviving. Monica crossed her arms, her diamond rings catching the harsh fluorescent light of the parking garage. Figure it out, Liam. Take out a payday loan, borrow it from a loan shark, sell a kidney for all I care. I want that $10,000 wired to my account by Friday, and if I do not get it, I am going to make your pathetic life even worse. I will go on LinkedIn and post a very public, very detailed account of emotional abuse. I will tag your employer, your managers, and every major supply chain recruiting firm in the state. I will tell them you are unstable, aggressive, and a liability. I will absolutely destroy your stagnant little career. You will never work in a corporate office again. A wave of cold, calculating clarity washed over me. She was actively trying to extort me. She was threatening to fabricate career-ending lies unless I paid her ransom. My hand was already in my pocket, resting against my smartphone. Without breaking eye contact, my thumb found the side button. I double-clicked it, activating the emergency voice memo shortcut I had set up months ago. The phone vibrated once, a silent confirmation that it was recording every single word. I let my shoulders slump. I made my voice shake slightly, playing the terrified victim. Please, Monica, do not do that, I stammered, looking down at the concrete floor. You already took everything. You got all the marital assets. You won. Is that not enough? Monica scoffed, stepping closer to me, entirely drunk on her own perceived power. You think you know everything about our assets, Liam. You are so naive, it is actually pathetic. Do you really think I let those lawyers split everything evenly? I looked up, widening my eyes in feigned confusion. What do you mean? Monica smirked, leaning in so close I could smell her expensive perfume. I mean that 2 months before I even filed the divorce paperwork, I systematically transferred $50,000 of our shared savings into my sister and her boutique business bank account. I claimed they were business expenses and private consulting fees. The judge never even blinked. You were so busy crying about our failing marriage that you never even noticed the money disappearing. You funded my new life, Liam, and now you are going to fund the rest of my legal fees. I let out a shaky breath, forcing a look of absolute defeat onto my face. Okay, I whispered, staring at my shoes. I will figure it out. I will get you the money by Friday. Just please do not post anything. Monica smiled a triumphant, wicked expression. Good boy, she said. She turned around, climbed into her leased Porsche, and slammed the heavy door. I stood in the damp parking garage and watched her taillights disappear around the concrete ramp. As soon as the engine noise faded, I pulled my phone out of my pocket. The red recording timer was still ticking on the screen. I hit stop and immediately backed the audio file up to my secure, encrypted cloud server. Monica thought she was holding a gun to my head. She had no idea she had just handed me the very rope I would use to hang her. The extortion threat was a felony, but the deliberate hiding of marital assets during discovery was perjury, and massive financial fraud. My family was about to lose their house, but Monica was about to lose her absolute freedom. The morning of the first arrived with the kind of crisp, clear sunrise that usually signals a new beginning. For my family, it signaled the beginning of the end. I was sitting at the massive marble island of my luxury penthouse, a property I had purchased entirely in cash through a secondary blind trust. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed panoramic view of the city skyline, but my attention was entirely focused on the glowing screen of my encrypted laptop. I held a mug of steaming black coffee in one hand, watching the digital clock in the corner of my screen tick closer to the final payment deadline. The private commercial loan my parents had taken out to fund Jamal and his phantom tech startup mandated that the massive $15,000 monthly payment be wired to Apex Asset Management LLC no later than 9 in the morning on the first of the month. It was now 8:59. I watched the holding account portal with bated breath, tracking incoming wire transfers. Jamal had spent the last 2 weeks leasing sports cars, booking high-end hotel suites, and maxing out newly acquired corporate credit cards to fund his lavish investor party. There was absolutely no way he had the liquid capital to cover the mortgage. The clock struck 9. The portal refreshed. The incoming transaction log remained completely empty. Jamal had officially defaulted. I picked up my phone and dialed Sterling. He answered immediately, anticipating the call. "The deadline has passed, Sterling," I said, keeping my voice smooth and dangerously calm. "The payment did not clear. I have the formal notice of default ready for deployment," Sterling replied, the typing of his keyboard echoing over the line. "Per your instructions, I have attached the mandatory $5,000 late penalty clause. The aggressive corporate language is finalized. We are sending it via certified overnight mail, but a digital copy will hit Jamal and his corporate inbox in exactly 30 seconds. Do not give them an inch," I instructed. "If they call, your team is to act as a cold, unyielding financial institution. No extensions, no grace periods, no sympathy." "Understood?" Sterling said. "Sending the notice now." I ended the call and took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee. The legal snare had officially snapped shut. Now I just had to watch them bleed. When they had unceremoniously kicked me out into the rain, they had forced me to pack my entire life into 4 black trash bags in a matter of minutes. In the chaos, I had conveniently forgotten to pack an old iPad I kept tucked away in the kitchen pantry. That device was synced to my primary iCloud account, which meant every single message sent in the family group chat was currently mirroring directly to my new phone. I had intentionally left it behind a digital Trojan horse, sitting quietly on a shelf feeding me every panicked conversation they thought was private. I opened the messaging app on my phone and waited. For exactly 12 minutes, there was complete silence. Then my screen lit up with a notification. It was a frantic message from Jamal in the group chat titled Family Trust. "Jamal Richard, call me immediately. There is a massive problem with the shadow lender." "Patricia, Jamal, sweetie, what is wrong? Is everything okay for the party this weekend?" "Jamal, no, Patricia, everything is not okay. The lending firm just sent me a notice of default. They are claiming we missed the mortgage payment and they slapped a $5,000 penalty on top of it. They want $20,000 wired by the end of the day, or they are initiating foreclosure on the house." "Stephanie, foreclosure? What are you talking about, Jamal? You said you paid that bill last week. You said the investor seed money covered it." There was a long pause in the chat. I could practically see the sweat forming on Jamal's forehead as his lies began to unravel in real time. "The seed money is tied up in a liquidity holding pattern. The bank froze the transfer because it was too large. It is a compliance issue. I just need a temporary bridge loan. I need you to wire me $20,000 right now so I can clear this up. I will pay you back next week with interest." The chat went dead for a full 3 minutes. When Richard finally responded, the tone of his text was frantic and entirely stripped of his usual arrogant authority. "Richard, I do not have $20,000 in liquid cash, Jamal, you know this. We leveraged the entire equity of the house to get you that initial $1.5 million. The rest of my assets are locked in retirement accounts that take 30 days to liquidate. If we default on this commercial loan, they take the property. You promised me this startup was generating revenue. You showed me the projections." "Jamal, projections are not cash, Richard. I am trying to build an empire here. You need to call your bank and get a personal loan. Today. If this lender forecloses, we lose the headquarters." Stephanie. "Oh my God, the party is this Saturday. The caterers are already paid. The contractors are still installing the marble. If we lose the house, where are we supposed to go?" "Jamal, stop panicking, Stephanie. I am handling it. I am calling the lender right now. It is just some faceless corporation. I will negotiate an extension. I am a CEO. These people respect businessmen like me. I will charm them into giving us another 30 days. I chuckled softly, setting my coffee mug down on the marble island. I watched the clock on my wall, counting down the seconds. Exactly 4 minutes later, Jamal sent another message to the group chat. The text was erratic, riddled with typos. "Jamal, they will not listen. I just talked to some legal representative at Apex Asset Management. They refused to transfer me to a manager. They said the contract is non-negotiable and the acceleration clause is active. They said if the $20,000 is not in their account by 5 o'clock today, they are sending an eviction warning. They do not care about my startup. They do not care about the investors. They just want the money. Patricia, Richard, do something. You are the patriarch of this family. Fix this. You cannot let them take our home." Richard, "It is not our home anymore, Patricia. We signed it over to the trust and used it as collateral for Jamal. If Jamal does not pay, we lose everything. We are completely exposed." The facade was cracking wide open. Jamal's image as the smooth, untouchable tech entrepreneur was dissolving into panicked desperation. Richard was finally realizing that his tough love strategy had actually handed his entire financial future to a reckless con artist. And Stephanie, the golden child, who had mocked my living situation just weeks prior, was now terrified of losing her stolen kingdom. I sat back in my plush leather chair and watched their digital world burn. They were turning on each other, tearing at the seams of their manufactured success. The panic was intoxicating, but this was only the beginning. I had promised myself total destruction, and I was not going to stop until they felt the exact same crushing despair they had forced upon me. The fallout from the missed payment rippled through the family group chat well into the night. I watched their digital panic until I finally fell asleep in my custom king-sized bed. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a direct text from Patricia. It was not an invitation to a luxury steakhouse this time. She asked me to meet her and Richard at a rundown diner on the outskirts of the city, a place with sticky tables and burnt drip coffee. The contrast was absolutely poetic. I put on my faded jacket, got into my rusted sedan, and drove to meet them, savoring every second of their impending humiliation. When I walked through the dingy glass door of the diner, the bell jingled weakly above my head. The smell of old grease and cheap bleach hit my nose. I spotted my parents sitting in a cracked vinyl booth near the back, hiding from the morning sun. The arrogant, untouchable aura they had projected just 2 weeks ago at the Capitol Grill was entirely gone. Richard looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. His usually immaculate posture was slumped, and the dark circles under his eyes spoke of a sleepless, terrifying night. Patricia was nervously shredding a paper napkin into tiny pieces. Her eyes were bloodshot and swollen, a clear sign she had been crying for hours. I slid into the booth opposite them, keeping my expression entirely neutral. I did not order anything. I just folded my hands on the sticky laminate table and waited for them to speak. Patricia reached across the table, trying to grab my hand, but I smoothly pulled it back. Liam, she started, her voice trembling with a vulnerability I had not heard since I was a child. Thank you for coming. We really did not know who else to turn to. We are in a terrible situation. I raised an eyebrow, feigning mild confusion. What happened to the massive investor party? I thought Jamal was swimming in seed money. Richard winced at the mention of Jamal's name. He leaned forward, keeping his voice in a harsh whisper so the waitress wiping the counter would not hear. That is exactly what we need to talk to you about. Jamal has run into a slight cash flow issue. The bank froze his startup capital due to some compliance red tape. It is a temporary hold, but the timing is catastrophic. A cash flow issue, I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the heavy air. Patricia let out a shaky sob. It is worse than that, Liam. The private lending firm we used to secure the house is threatening us. They are an evil, heartless corporate entity. Jamal missed one single payment because of the bank freeze, and this faceless company slapped us with a $5,000 penalty. They sent a formal notice of default this morning. If we do not pay them $20,000 by the end of the week, they are going to initiate an expedited foreclosure. They are going to take the house, Liam. They are going to take the headquarters and leave Stephanie homeless. I looked at my mother, watching the fake tears roll down her cheeks. They had partnered with an imaginary tech CEO to kick me out of my own home, and now they expected me to feel sorry for them because the trap they set for themselves had finally sprung. That sounds like a massive problem for Jamal, I said calmly. But I do not see how this involves me. My career is stagnant, remember? I am just a boring analyst. Richard ground his teeth, his desperation barely masking his simmering anger. Do not play games right now, Liam. This is serious. We cannot liquidate our retirement accounts fast enough to cover the penalty. Jamal's credit is tied up in the business. We need a bridge loan. Just a personal loan to cover the $20,000 and give Jamal a month to unlock his investor funds. I stared at him, letting the absolute absurdity of his request wash over me. You want me to give you $20,000, not give Patricia, interrupted frantically. Just cosign. We found a secondary lender willing to give us the cash today, but they need a guarantor with a steady W-2 income and a clean debt-to-income ratio. Your supply chain job might not be glamorous, but it is stable. If you just put your name on the paperwork, we can save the house. Jamal will pay off the loan next month, we promise. I sat back in the cracked vinyl booth. They were genuinely asking me to leverage my own financial future to take on high-interest, unsecured debt to bail out the man who had gleefully thrown a $100 bill at my chest while I stood surrounded by trash bags. They wanted me to ruin my credit to save the house they stole from me. I looked them dead in the eye, dropping the defeated son act entirely. My voice was cold, sharp, and completely devoid of empathy. You threw me out into the rain with my clothes in trash bags, I said, pronouncing every single word with deadly precision. Why would I ruin my credit for the man who stole my home? Patricia gasped, clutching her chest as if I had physically struck her. Liam, how can you be so cruel? Family sacrifices for family. We are your flesh and blood. Stephanie is your sister. You cannot just sit back and watch us lose everything. You have to help us. I did not flinch. You stopped being my family the second you tossed my keys in the trash and laughed with my ex-wife, I replied. You made a bad investment, Richard. You backed a complete fraud. Now you get to pay the price. Richard's face turned a violent shade of purple. The desperation vanished, replaced instantly by the toxic, nasty arrogance I knew so well. He slammed his fist down on the sticky table, rattling the empty sugar dispensers. You selfish, ungrateful failure, Richard spat, his voice rising in volume. We gave you everything. We raised you, and the one time your family comes to you for a simple favor, you turn your back on us out of petty jealousy. You have always been small-minded, Liam. You will never amount to anything, and you are going to die alone in whatever miserable hole you crawled into. The waitress stopped wiping the counter, staring at our booth. The few other patrons in the diner turned to look at the angry old man screaming at his son. I did not feel an ounce of embarrassment. I felt absolute power. I stood up, slowly smoothing the wrinkles out of my faded jacket. I looked down at the man who had betrayed me and the woman who had let it happen. I was completely unbothered by his childish tantrum. "Good luck with the foreclosure, Richard," I said quietly. "I hear Apex Asset Management is absolutely ruthless." I turned around and walked out of the diner without looking back. The bell jingled above the door as I stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. I left them sitting in that cheap vinyl booth, suffocating in their own panic, completely unaware that the ruthless corporate entity destroying their lives was the very son they had just cursed. The final phase was officially in motion. The days following that pathetic diner meeting blurred into a highly entertaining spectacle of slow-motion destruction. I settled back into the quiet luxury of my penthouse, letting Sterling and his legal team tighten the vice. I refused to answer any phone calls from unknown numbers. I ignored every single email. I let the silence do the heavy lifting. 30 days passed, and exactly as I had calculated, Jamal missed the second consecutive payment. The aggressive late fees compounded. The principal balance swelled. The legal window for them to magically pull $20,000 out of thin air slammed completely shut. The financial pressure instantly turned my toxic family into a pack of starving wolves. From the comfort of my leather sofa, I monitored the synced iPad on my coffee table. The family group chat, once a place for them to brag and plot my downfall, became a digital war zone. The facade of polite society vanished. Richard demanded to see Jamal's corporate ledger. Jamal accused Richard of having weak financial literacy. Patricia tried to play peacemaker and was viciously verbally attacked by her own daughter. Stephanie blamed my parents for pressuring them into taking the loan in the first place. They were trapped in a burning building of their own making, and instead of looking for an exit, they were fighting over who started the fire. The first tangible piece of their fake empire crumbled on a Tuesday night. I woke up to a flurry of frantic text notifications lighting up the dark bedroom. It was 2 a.m. Jamal was typing in all caps a frantic string of messages directed at my father. He claimed someone had stolen his car from the driveway. 10 minutes later, the narrative changed. It was not a theft, it was a repossession. The leasing company, noticing the massive hit to Jamal's credit score from the commercial loan default, had quietly sent a tow truck in the dead of night. Jamal had run out onto the lawn in his expensive silk pajamas, screaming at the repo men, only to watch his symbol of fake wealth disappear down the street. The humiliation was absolute, and he was broadcasting every miserable detail directly to my screen. By Wednesday afternoon, the stress had completely fractured Stephanie's fragile grip on reality. I was sitting at my kitchen island when a notification popped up on my phone. Stephanie was going live on social media. I cast the feed to my living room television. The golden child was unrecognizable. She was sitting on the floor of my old living room, surrounded by half-finished marble installations and exposed drywall. Her designer makeup was smeared down her cheeks, her hair was a tangled mess, and her eyes were wild with panic. She stared into the camera lens and began sobbing uncontrollably. "The economy is just so brutal right now," Stephanie cried to her bewildered followers. "Jamal and I have worked so hard to build this incredible tech empire. We put our blood, sweat, and tears into this startup. But the banks are being so unfair. They are freezing our assets. They are trying to steal our headquarters. We are victims of a broken financial system. Please, if anyone can help me." I am putting my digital payment link in the chat. We just need a little support to keep our dreams alive. I took a slow sip of my water, completely mesmerized by the sheer lack of self-awareness. She was sitting in a stolen house, crying over a fake business begging strangers on the internet to pay for her luxury lifestyle. But Stephanie's pathetic broadcast reached an audience she had not intended. Across town, Monica was watching the exact same live stream. During our divorce, Monica had been so incredibly proud of her own devious intellect. She had gloated in the parking garage about hiding $50,000 in marital assets. What she had not mentioned, but what became brilliantly clear over the next hour, was what she had done with that stolen money. Believing the hype surrounding Jamal's fake tech company, Monica had secretly invested the entire $50,000 into his startup as seed capital. She thought she was buying in on the ground floor of the next major Silicon Valley unicorn. She expected a massive, rapid return on her stolen investment. Seeing Stephanie crying on the floor begging for digital donations completely shattered Monica's delusion. She realized, in a blinding flash of panic, that Jamal was not a tech genius. He was a broke fraud, and her $50,000 was completely gone, blown on luxury hotel suites, dry-aged steaks, and repossessed sports cars. Monica did what any cornered, desperate narcissist would do. She drove straight to the house. I did not need the group chat to see what happened next. By that evening, the algorithm had done the work for me. A video titled "Suburban Housewives Fight Over Fake Money" was trending on a local community page. I clicked play. The shaky cell phone footage had clearly been recorded by one of my old neighbors from across the street. The video showed Monica storming up the driveway, screaming at the top of her lungs. Stephanie walked out onto the front porch, still looking like a wrecked mess from her live stream. The confrontation was immediate and explosive. "You stole my money!" Monica shrieked, pointing a manicured finger directly in my sister's face. "You and your scam artist husband took my $50,000. I want it back right now." Stephanie screamed right back, her voice cracking with hysteria. "It was an investment, Monica. Businesses have risk. You cannot just demand it back because we hit a rough patch. Jamal used that money for corporate expenses." "Corporate expenses?" Monica roared, stepping aggressively onto the porch. "He bought a watch. He leased a car that just got towed. You are both broke liars. I will sue you. I will drag you into court and take everything you own." "You do not own anything either," Stephanie shrieked, pushing Monica back. "You are just a bitter divorcee who thought she could buy her way into our success. Get off my property before I call the police." The two women devolved into a vicious, unhinged screaming match, hurling insults and exposing every dirty family secret right there on the manicured front lawn. They slapped at each other, pulling hair and completely destroying whatever shred of dignity they had left. The neighbors watched in stunned silence, their cameras rolling, capturing every glorious second of the absolute meltdown. I sat in my penthouse, watching the thieves eat each other alive on a viral video. They had tried to bury me, but they had only succeeded in digging their own graves. And the best part was, they had not even hit the bottom yet. The viral video of Monica and Stephanie tearing each other apart on my front lawn garnered over 2 million views by Thursday morning. I watched it one last time before closing the laptop and picking up my phone. The entertainment portion of this phase was officially over. It was time to drive the final nail into the coffin. I dialed Sterling. He answered before the second ring. "The 30-day countdown clock starts today, Sterling," I said, looking out over the city skyline. "Jamal and my parents have completely exhausted their grace period. I want the final foreclosure and eviction proceedings initiated immediately." "Understood," Liam Sterling replied. "We have received a flood of communications from Jamal over the last 48 hours. He sent dozens of emails, begging for a forbearance agreement. He even offered to restructure the debt at a massive interest rate if we grant an extra 6 months. Absolutely not, I said. Reject every single plea. Reject every offer to restructure. Do not offer them a payment plan. I want Apex Asset Management to be an impenetrable brick wall. The foreclosure is absolute. In exactly 30 days, I want the local sheriff at that property with a court-ordered eviction notice. Consider it done, Sterling said. I will have my team send the formal rejection letters via certified mail this afternoon. They will know unequivocally that they are completely out of options. I ended the call and walked into the master bathroom of my penthouse. I stared at my reflection in the illuminated mirror. The man staring back at me still looked like the tired, defeated analyst who had been tossed out into the rain. My hair was overgrown, my skin looked exhausted, and my posture was burdened by years of catering to a family that despised me. It was time for the exterior to match the reality of who I had become. The defeated son was dead. I took a private car to an exclusive grooming lounge in the financial district. I did not ask for a price list. I simply sat in the vintage leather barber chair and told the master stylist to make me look like I owned the building. An hour later, the shaggy, overgrown hair was gone, replaced by a sharp cut that framed my face perfectly. A straight razor shave removed the heavy shadow on my jawline, revealing a sharp, commanding structure I had almost forgotten I possessed. From there, I walked down the avenue to a bespoke luxury tailor. The shop was hushed, smelling of rich mahogany and fine wool. The master tailor took one look at my posture and immediately understood the assignment. For the next 2 hours, I stood in front of a three-way mirror while he pinned and measured. I purchased a custom-tailored charcoal gray suit made from imported Italian wool. The price tag was a staggering $5,000. I swiped my new black card without a second thought. When I slipped the jacket on, it fit like a second skin. The broad shoulders and perfectly tapered waist transformed my entire silhouette. I no longer looked like a man who took orders. I looked like a man who gave them. To complete the transformation, I crossed the street to a high-end boutique jeweler. I had zero interest in the gaudy diamond-encrusted monstrosities Jamal used to project fake wealth. True power does not need to scream for attention. I selected a sleek, understated platinum timepiece from a legendary Swiss watchmaker. It was elegant, incredibly rare, and cost more than my parents had originally paid for their first house. I fastened the heavy metal band around my wrist, feeling the cool weight of undeniable success. I was sitting in the back of my hired town car, running my thumb over the smooth platinum casing of my new watch, when my phone buzzed. It was an incoming call from Stephanie. I let it ring. I had absolutely no desire to speak to her directly, but I knew she would not be able to resist leaving a message. The voicemail notification popped up a moment later. I connected my wireless earbuds, tapped play, and leaned back against the plush leather seat. The audio began with a sharp, ragged intake of breath. When Stephanie spoke, her voice was completely unhinged. It was a terrifying mixture of hysterical sobbing and blinding, venomous rage. "This is all your fault," Stephanie screamed into the microphone, her voice distorting the audio file. "Do you hear me? Everything is falling apart, and it is entirely your fault. If you had just been a better son, Mom and Dad would not have had to leverage the house to help Jamal. If you were not such a pathetic, stagnant loser, you could have co-signed that loan and saved us. But no, you are selfish. You have always been selfish." She paused to take another ragged breath, and the venom in her voice deepened. "A real man would do whatever it takes to protect his family. A real man would sell his own organs on the black market to save his sister from going bankrupt. But you are not a real man, Liam. You are a coward. Jamal is 10 times the man you will ever be, even without his startup capital. I hate you. Mom and Dad hate you. I hope you die alone in a gutter because you are absolutely dead to us." The line went dead. I did not feel angry. I did not feel hurt. I felt a profound, chilling sense of validation. I tapped the screen, exporting the audio file to my secure encrypted cloud server. I labeled it Stephanie Confession and locked it away. I was going to need that exact recording very soon. The 30-day countdown was ticking, and they had just handed me the final weapon I needed for execution day. The 30-day countdown ticked away with absolute silence from my end, but the digital noise coming from my former home was deafening. Jamal was backed into a terrifying corner, and instead of surrendering to the reality of his impending financial doom, he decided to double down on his absolute delusion. Word reached me through the synced iPad sitting on my coffee table that Jamal had hatched a final, spectacular scheme. If he could not fake his way into wealth, he was going to try and scam his way out of poverty. He was going to host the lavish investor dinner he had been bragging about for weeks. Through the group chat, I watched Jamal manipulate my father one last time. Jamal convinced Richard that the only way to save the house from the ruthless hands of Apex Asset Management was to secure actual venture capital immediately. To do that, Jamal argued they needed to project extreme, undeniable wealth to potential investors. They had to look like they did not need the money in order to get the money. It was a classic con artist tactic, and Richard, driven entirely mad by the paralyzing fear of losing everything, swallowed the lie whole. I read the text messages in sheer disbelief as Richard agreed to liquidate the very last of his emergency retirement funds. He drained his final, heavily penalized safety net to pay for the illusion of success. He wired the last of his life savings to a premium catering company, a professional valet service, and a live string quartet. They were throwing a massive, exorbitantly expensive gala in a house that legally belonged to my shadow corporation, entirely funded by the last pennies my father would ever see. The guest list was a masterpiece of suburban desperation. Through Stephanie's manic social media posts, I saw exactly who they were inviting. Jamal had cast a wide net, inviting local socialites, minor real estate developers, and anyone who drove a luxury car and possessed a checkbook. Even Monica managed to secure an invitation. She had apparently recovered from her unhinged front-lawn screaming match with my sister. She was never one to miss an opportunity to leech off someone else's perceived success. Monica arrived on the arm of a brand-new boyfriend. He was a flashy, loud man who aggressively marketed himself as a cryptocurrency millionaire. He wore a velvet blazer and spent his time explaining the blockchain to anyone who would make the mistake of making eye contact with him. Monica was still desperately circling the drain, hoping to somehow claw back a return on her stolen $50,000 by schmoozing with Jamal's imaginary high-net-worth network. The night of the gala finally arrived. It was exactly 3 days before the local sheriff was scheduled to execute the final eviction order. The trap was fully loaded. It was time for me to pull the trigger. I stood in the master bedroom of my luxury penthouse, looking at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. I was wearing the $5,000 bespoke charcoal suit I had purchased earlier in the week. The imported Italian wool draped perfectly over my frame. The crisp white shirt and subtle silk tie projected an aura of quiet, devastating power. The heavy platinum watch rested coolly against my wrist. I looked flawless. I looked like the multimillionaire I actually was. But I could not walk through the front door of my old house looking like this. The execution required a much more theatrical approach. My family needed to see the Liam they despised one last time. They needed to look down on me right before I ripped the rug out from under their feet. I walked into my massive walk-in closet, bypassed the rows of designer clothing, and reached into the very back corner. I pulled out the cheap, worn-out, oversized jacket I had been wearing the night they threw me out into the pouring rain. The fabric was rough, the color was faded, and it still carried the faint, lingering smell of that damp motel room. I slipped the cheap jacket on over my bespoke suit. The transformation was immediate and brilliant. The thick, oversized material completely hid the broad, tailored shoulders of the Italian wool. It swallowed the crisp white collar of my dress shirt and completely covered the expensive platinum watch on my left wrist. I slouched my shoulders slightly, letting the heavy fabric drag my posture down. Looking in the mirror, the wealthy executive vanished. I was once again the defeated, stagnant supply chain analyst. I was the pathetic failure they had laughed at. I was the perfect Trojan horse. I took the elevator down to the private garage and bypassed the row of sleek company cars I could have easily used. Instead, I got into my old rusted sedan. I drove across the city, heading back to the manicured suburban neighborhood I had spent 5 years building a life in. When I reached my old street, the sheer scale of Jamal's delusion became visible. The entire block was lined with luxury vehicles. Porsches, Mercedes, and heavy black SUVs were parked end to end, all having been handed over to the professional valet team Richard had paid for with his dying dime. I did not pull up to the valet stand. I stepped out of the car and began the short walk down the sidewalk. The cool evening air felt sharp and electrifying against my face. As I approached, the house looked absolutely magnificent from the outside. Golden light spilled elegantly. I stepped out of the car and began the short walk down the sidewalk. The cool evening air felt sharp and electrifying against my face. As I approached, the house looked absolutely magnificent from the outside. Golden light spilled elegantly from the large bay windows I had installed myself. I could hear the rich classical notes of the live string quartet drifting beautifully through the night air, mingling with the low hum of wealth conservation. Waitstaff in crisp white shirts and black bow ties were circulating on the manicured front lawn, carrying silver trays lined with crystal flutes of expensive champagne. It was a perfect, beautiful, incredibly expensive lie. The entire scene was a hollow shell propped up by stolen money and predatory debt. I stood at the edge of the driveway, completely invisible in the shadows of the tall front hedges, wrapped securely in my cheap jacket. I listened to the music and watched the silhouettes of the guests moving behind the glass. I took a deep breath, adjusted the faded collar of my disguise, and took my first step into the glowing lights of my former home. The heavy oak front doors stood wide open to welcome the imaginary investors, guarded only by a bored teenager in a rented valet uniform who barely glanced at me as I walked past. I stepped over the marble threshold, stepping onto the very same imported stone I had painstakingly selected and paid for 2 years ago. The air inside the grand foyer was thick with the scent of expensive catered truffle hors d'oeuvres and the desperate perfume of people trying to act infinitely richer than they actually were. I stood just inside the entryway, letting the sheer absurdity of the scene wash over me. The expansive living room was packed shoulder to shoulder. Women in silk cocktail dresses and men in sharp dinner jackets stood in tight clusters, swirling their crystal champagne flutes. Jamal held court near the massive stone fireplace, gesturing wildly with his empty hands as he pitched his non-existent tech empire to a captive, wealthy audience. I took 3 slow steps into the main hall, my faded, oversized jacket catching the brilliant, harsh light of the crystal chandelier. The visual contrast was jarring and deliberate. I looked like a vagrant who had wandered straight off the street into an exclusive country club gathering. The cellist was the first person to notice me. Her bow hesitated mid-stroke, dragging a sharp, discordant scrape across the heavy strings. The sudden, ugly noise startled the violinist sitting next to her, who also faltered and missed his cue. Within 5 seconds, the beautiful, expensive classical music sputtered and died completely, leaving a vacuum of sound in its wake. The silence that followed was absolute heavy and completely suffocating. It rippled through the crowded room like a physical shockwave. Polite conversations snapped shut instantly. Heads turned one by one, directed by the sudden lack of music. The delicate clinking of crystal glasses ceased entirely. The wealthy socialites, local real estate developers, and minor businessmen stared at me with wide eyes, their expressions rapidly shifting from polite confusion to profound, unveiled disgust. Stephanie was standing near the base of the grand curving staircase, holding a silver tray of caviar canapes she was distributing to maintain the illusion of being a perfect hostess. She turned to follow the collective gaze of her affluent crowd. When her eyes landed on my faded jacket and unkempt exterior, all the color drained instantly from her perfectly manicured face. Her jaw dropped. The heavy silver tray slipped from her trembling hands, crashing onto the marble floor with a deafening metallic clatter that made several guests physically jump. Expensive caviar smeared across the pristine stone tiles. "Who let the homeless guy in?" Stephanie shrieked, her voice, echoing shrilly off the high vaulted ceilings, instantly shattering the very last remnants of the elegant, refined atmosphere she had paid so much to create. "Call security! Get him out of here right now before he steals something!" Her hysterical screams snapped the rest of my family out of their frozen shock. Richard, who had been aggressively networking with a minor investor near the wet bar, turned and saw me standing by the door. The polite, charming, sophisticated smile he had been faking all evening vanished in a millisecond. His face flushed a violent, dangerous shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulged aggressively against the tight collar of his rented tuxedo. He did not hesitate, and he certainly did not care about the optics of causing a scene. His toxic rage completely overrode any shred of common sense he had left. He abandoned his potential investor without a word, shoved his way violently through the crowd of stunned guests, and marched directly toward me. Richard closed the distance between us in seconds. He did not ask why I was there. He lunged forward and grabbed the faded fabric of my cheap lapel with both of his shaking hands, twisting the material into a tight, desperate fist. "You are an absolute embarrassment," Richard spat his voice, a low, terrifying growl that carried perfectly through the dead silent room. He shook me hard, trying to physically intimidate me, completely unaware of the dense $5,000 Italian wool suit hidden securely beneath his fists. "What are you doing here, you pathetic failure? You are ruining your sister's future. You are ruining everything I have built. Get out of my house right this second before I drag you out into the street myself." I did not resist his grip. I did not raise my hands to defend myself or push him away. I simply planted my feet, felt the cool weight of the platinum watch against my wrist, hidden beneath the oversized sleeve, and let him shake me. I looked deep into his eyes and saw the raw, unfiltered terror hiding just beneath his furious exterior. He was utterly terrified that my mere presence, looking like a defeated, broken vagrant, would shatter the elaborate, fragile illusion of wealth they had mortgaged their entire lives to project. I slowly shifted my gaze past Richard's purple sweating face to observe his captive audience. The wealthy guests were physically stepping back, shifting uncomfortably and exchanging deeply concerned glances. They had come to hear a brilliant pitch from a visionary entrepreneur, and instead, they were watching a supposedly wealthy, dignified patriarch physically assault a disheveled man in the middle of a cocktail reception. The polished facade was disintegrating right before their eyes, turning their expensive gala into a trashy spectacle. Near the kitchen entrance, Monica was leaning against her new, flashy crypto investor boyfriend. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my faded jacket and threw her head back, laughing with loud, theatrical cruelty. Her boyfriend joined in, snickering and whispering in her ear, thoroughly enjoying the spectacle of my apparent humiliation. Jamal finally broke away from his stunned group by the fireplace. He strode across the room, aggressively puffing his chest out in a desperate attempt to look like the commanding CEO he was pretending to be. He stopped right next to my father, crossing his arms and glaring at me with maximum calculated hostility. You heard the man, Liam Jamal sneered, trying to project a deep, intimidating baritone that only highlighted his panic. You do not belong here. This is a closed corporate event for high net worth individuals. It is not a soup kitchen. Leave immediately before I call the local police and have you arrested for criminal trespassing. I stood perfectly still, letting their collective venom wash over me. I absorbed every single insult, every hysterical scream, and every nasty echoing laugh. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact, and I did not say a single word. The sheer beauty of the moment was entirely intoxicating. I did not have to ruin their incredibly expensive gala. They were doing it entirely by themselves. They were exposing their absolute ugliest, most toxic colors in front of the exact people they were so desperately trying to scam. I let the deeply uncomfortable silence stretch out for 10 excruciating seconds, holding my ground, waiting for the perfect moment to drop the disguise and burn their entire world to the ground. Jamal's patience completely evaporated. The veins in his neck pulsed rapidly against his collar. He was no longer trying to look like a sophisticated tech executive in front of his wealthy guests. He was just an angry, cornered fraud whose massive ego had been publicly challenged. He took a wide, aggressive stance, raised his right hand, and balled it into a tight fist. He aimed directly for the collar of my cheap faded jacket, fully intending to grab me and physically drag me out into the street. I stood my ground, my heart beating in a slow, steady rhythm, waiting for him to make contact. Just as Jamal lunged forward, a massive, deafening crash echoed through the grand foyer. The heavy, custom oak front doors did not just open. They burst inward with terrifying force, slamming violently against the interior walls. The loud bang caused several women in the room to scream. The crisp, cold evening air rushed into the sweltering, perfume-soaked house, instantly changing the atmosphere and sucking the warmth right out of the room. 2 uniformed county sheriffs strode through the doorway. They were heavily armed, wearing tactical vests over their crisp tan uniforms. Their heavy black boots thudded rhythmically and violently against the expensive marble floors, a stark and intimidating contrast to the soft leather loafers of the affluent crowd. Flanking the officers was Attorney Sterling. He looked absolutely lethal. He wore a navy blue pinstripe suit, perfectly tailored to his sharp frame, and he carried a thick, brass-locked leather briefcase in his right hand. He surveyed the chaotic, crowded room with the cold, calculating eyes of an apex predator scanning a field of trapped prey. The arrival of law enforcement at a high society investor dinner was the ultimate taboo. The wealthy socialites, local developers, and minor businessmen instantly panicked. They scrambled backward, knocking over cocktail tables and dropping their crystal champagne flutes onto the stone floor to get out of the way. They formed a wide, terrified circle, treating my family like a contagious disease. The beautiful illusion of a high net worth gathering shattered into a million irreversible pieces. Stephanie, however, completely misread the situation. Her sheer arrogance blinded her to the reality of what was happening. She saw the police uniforms and immediately assumed her perceived wealthy status had summoned them to her defense. She crossed her arms over her chest, her panicked expression melting into a deeply ugly, triumphant smirk. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated malice. Good Stephanie sneered, projecting her shrill voice so every single potential investor in the room could hear her. "The police are here. It is about time. Arrest this loser for trespassing on our property. Get him out of my house." She gestured wildly toward me, expecting the officers to tackle me to the marble floor. I did not move a single muscle. I just maintained eye contact with her, letting a tiny razor-sharp smile form on my lips. The lead sheriff, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern, deeply lined face, did not even glance in my direction. He ignored Stephanie completely. He walked straight past me, his broad shoulder brushing against the rough fabric of my oversized disguise. He marched directly into the center of the wide circle the guests had formed, stopping mere inches away from Jamal and Richard. Jamal froze his raised fist, dropping slowly to his side. His arrogant sneer faltered instantly as he realized the heavily armed officer was glaring directly at him, not at the supposed vagrant standing by the door. The sheriff reached down to his tactical belt and unclipped a heavy brass ring. He pulled a thick, tightly folded stack of official legal documents from his pouch. Without a word of preamble, he raised the crisp white papers and slapped them hard against Jamal's chest, forcing my brother-in-law to grab them instinctively before they fell to the floor. The sheriff took a deep breath, and his voice boomed through the dead-silent living room, echoing powerfully off the high vaulted ceilings I had paid to construct. Jamal and Stephanie Williams, the sheriff announced, his tone entirely devoid of sympathy or hesitation. Richard and Patricia, by order of the state court, this property has been fully foreclosed upon due to severe delinquency and breach of contract. A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the crowd of wealthy guests. The word foreclosed hung in the air, like a physical weight, instantly destroying the brilliant, expensive illusion of the tech empire. The investors stared at Jamal with absolute disgust, realizing they had been invited to a scam orchestrated by a broke, defaulting fraud. "You are in direct violation of a final court order," the sheriff continued, his voice ringing loud and clear over the murmurs of the crowd. "You are being officially evicted from these premises effective immediately." Richard stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck, bumping hard into a silver catering table. The remaining caviar canapes slid off the edge, ruining the expensive rug below. Patricia let out a high-pitched, strangled whimper, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. Jamal just stood there, his mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish, clutching the eviction notice to his chest. "You have exactly 30 minutes to collect your essential personal belongings and vacate the premises," the sheriff commanded, stepping forward to emphasize his authority. "If you or any of your guests are still inside this house at the end of that 30 minutes, you will be placed in handcuffs and arrested for criminal trespassing. The clock starts right now." Absolute chaos erupted. The wealthy guests did not wait for further instructions. The minor businessmen and socialites stampeded toward the front doors, desperate to distance themselves from the toxic, humiliating scene. They pushed past me, abandoning their drinks and fleeing into the night. Monica and her loud crypto investor boyfriend were the first ones out, sprinting toward the valet stand without looking back. The string quartet quickly packed up their expensive instruments and sprinted out the back door. The waitstaff abandoned their silver trays and vanished into the kitchen. Within 60 seconds, the magnificent, exorbitant gala was completely dead, leaving only my panicked family standing in the center of the ruined living room. Stephanie let out a blood-curdling, hysterical scream. She dropped to her knees right there on the imported marble floor, pulling at her designer hair, completely unhinged by the sudden, violent destruction of her fake reality. Richard grabbed his chest, breathing heavily, completely paralyzed by the realization that his entire life savings had just paid for the catering at his own eviction party. I remained perfectly still near the entryway, wrapped securely in my cheap jacket. I watched them drown in their own arrogance, letting the sheer perfection of the moment wash over me. The trap had slammed shut, and the execution was completely flawless. The echo of the sheriff's 30-minute warning hung in the grand foyer like a death sentence. For a few agonizing seconds, no one moved. Then the sheer weight of reality crashed down on Jamal. His carefully constructed facade of a cool, collected tech visionary shattered into a million jagged pieces. He frantically waved the eviction notice in the air, his face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. "This is a mistake!" Jamal screamed, his voice cracking wildly as he stepped toward the heavily armed officers. You cannot do this. I am a highly respected entrepreneur. I have tenant rights. I have squatters' rights. You cannot just throw me out onto the street in the middle of the night without due process." The lead sheriff did not flinch. He simply rested his hand on his tactical belt. "The foreclosure process was legally finalized this morning, sir," the sheriff stated firmly. "You ignored every notice. You defaulted on the commercial loan. Apex Asset Management owns this property outright, and they have demanded immediate vacant possession. Your 30 minutes are now down to 29. Jamal was hyperventilating now, spit flying from his lips as he doubled down on his delusion. "Apex Asset Management is a faceless, predatory corporation," he shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the sheriff. "They are operating illegally. I know people. I have high net worth connections. I have rights. Let me call the CEO of Apex Asset Management right now. I will have your badge for this. I will sue this entire county into bankruptcy." Richard stepped forward, his face pale and slick with cold sweat. "Jamal, please," Richard begged, his voice weak and trembling. "Just call the bank. Call your investors. We can fix this. We just need to explain the situation to the CEO." From the shadows near the entryway, Attorney Sterling stepped smoothly into the center of the ruined foyer. He moved with the effortless grace of a man who held all the cards. He snapped his brass-locked briefcase shut and placed it on a nearby marble table. He looked at Jamal, who was still hyperventilating and waving the eviction papers at the officers. Sterling calmly reached up and adjusted his silver-framed glasses. A razor-sharp, deeply satisfied smile spread across his face. "There is absolutely no need to call the CEO," Jamal Sterling said. His voice was smooth, quiet, and carried a lethal authority that instantly silenced my panicked brother-in-law. "You will not be needing a phone because he is standing right in front of you." Jamal froze, his mouth hanging open in a silent gasp. Richard and Patricia whipped their heads around, their eyes wide with profound confusion. Stephanie stopped pulling at her hair and stared at Sterling as if he had just started speaking a foreign language. Sterling raised his right hand and pointed directly across the marble floor. He pointed straight at me, the man still standing quietly by the front door, wearing the faded, oversized, rain-stained jacket of a defeated failure. Every single eye in the room followed Sterling's finger. They stared at me. For one long, breathless moment, the silence was absolute. My family looked at me wrapped in my cheap disguise, completely unable to process the impossible realities standing in front of them. It was time. I maintained unbroken eye contact with Jamal. I slowly reached up with both hands and grabbed the rough lapels of the cheap jacket. With one smooth, deliberate motion, I shrugged the oversized garment off my shoulders. I let it slide down my arms and drop heavily to the imported marble floor. The visual transformation was violent and absolute. The pathetic, slouched vagrant vanished instantly. In his place stood a man radiating undeniable power and wealth. The heavy $5,000 bespoke Italian wool suit caught the brilliant light of the crystal chandelier. The charcoal fabric hugged my broad shoulders and tapered waist perfectly. The crisp, blindingly white collar of my tailored dress shirt framed my freshly groomed face. The heavy platinum watch gleamed against my wrist. I rolled my shoulders back, standing tall and commanding in the center of the foyer I had built. The physical reaction from my family was a masterpiece of pure, visceral horror. Patricia let out a choked, suffocating gasp and literally collapsed backward onto a velvet accent chair, her legs completely giving out beneath her. The physical reaction from my family was a masterpiece of pure, visceral horror. Patricia let out a choked, suffocating gasp and literally collapsed backward onto a velvet accent chair, her legs completely giving out beneath her. Richard stumbled backward as if I had shot him in the chest. All the blood instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. His jaw dropped open, but his vocal cords were completely paralyzed. Stephanie fell backward, scrambling away from me on the marble floor like a frightened child. Her eyes were bugging out of her head, completely unable to reconcile the magnificent, powerful man standing before her with the brother she had relentlessly abused and discarded. But Jamal's reaction was the most glorious of all. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the click. He was paralyzed, his eyes locked onto my tailored suit, his brain misfiring as it tried to comprehend the magnitude of his own destruction. I stepped forward, my expensive leather Oxfords clicking sharply against the stone tiles. I walked slowly and deliberately until I was standing mere inches away from Jamal. I looked down at him, letting the sheer weight of my victory crush whatever was left of his massive ego. I reached into the inner breast pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out a sleek, matte black business card with raised gold lettering. I held it out to him. Jamal's hands were shaking violently. He slowly reached out and took the card. He looked down at the embossed text. Apex Asset Management, I said, my voice echoing loudly in the dead silent room, completely devoid of any emotion other than pure, cold dominance. Jamal looked up at me, a single tear of absolute terror leaking from the corner of his eye. I bought your debt, Jamal. I continued enunciating every single word with deadly precision. You missed your payments. You defaulted. You financed your fake lifestyle with my capital, and now I am collecting. This is my house, again. The words hit them like physical blows. The realization washed over Richard and Patricia in a wave of crushing despair. They had not just lost their home to a faceless corporation. They had handed their home, their life savings, and their future directly to the son they had thrown out like trash. They had funded their own demise. They had fallen perfectly into my trap, and they had absolutely no one to blame but themselves. The absolute silence of the grand foyer shattered as the horrific reality finally registered in my mother's mind. The thin veil of denial completely tore apart, revealing the raw, ugly truth of their desperate situation. Patricia let out a loud, agonizing wail that sounded like a wounded animal caught in a steel trap. Her knees completely buckled beneath her. The woman who had sneered at my trash bags, who had gleefully planned a massive remodel of my house, while I was still packing my clothes in the rain, collapsed onto the cold, imported marble floor. She crawled forward on her hands and knees across the expensive stone, completely abandoning any shred of dignity or grace. Tears streamed heavily down her meticulously made-up face, leaving dark, jagged streaks of expensive mascara tracking down her pale cheeks. She reached out with trembling, desperate hands and grabbed the perfectly tailored hem of my bespoke charcoal gray pants. "Liam, my baby," she sobbed hysterically, her voice echoing shrilly off the high vaulted ceiling. "We did not know. We had no idea. It was you holding the debt this whole time. You are our son. You are my firstborn. We are your parents. Please, I am begging you on my hands and knees, do not do this to us. Do not take our home away. We were just trying to help your sister build a future. We never meant to hurt you this badly." I did not reach down to comfort her. I did not offer a forgiving hand or a warm embrace. I simply took a deliberate half-step backward, smoothly pulling the expensive Italian wool out of her frantic, clutching grip. I looked down at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. She was not crying because she regretted betraying me. She was crying because she had finally lost. Seeing his wife crawling on the floor finally snapped Richard out of his paralyzed state. He tried desperately to salvage the patriarchal authority he had weaponized against him my entire life. He took a shaky step forward, raising a trembling finger attempting to summon the booming, arrogant voice he usually used to keep me in line. "Liam, you stop this nonsense right now," Richard commanded. But the grand facade crumbled instantly. His vocal cords completely betrayed him, and the stern command broke into a pathetic, high-pitched whimper. I am your father, and I am ordering you to call off this eviction immediately. We can fix this mess. You owe us for raising you. You owe us for everything we did for you. You cannot just throw your own blood out onto the street. Jamal saw Richard completely failing to assert dominance and immediately changed his tactics. The aggressive, untouchable tech billionaire vanished in the blink of an eye, replaced entirely by a desperate, sweating street hustler trying to talk his way out of a dangerous corner. Sweat poured profusely down Jamal's forehead, completely soaking the stiff collar of his expensive silk shirt. He held up both hands in a gesture of surrender, forcing a nervous, frantic smile that made him look completely deranged in the harsh lighting. "Come on, man," Jamal stammered, taking a cautious step closer to me. "You played a magnificent hand. I have to admit it. It was a brilliant, ruthless business move. I respect it. I really do. But we are family at the end of the day. We are brothers. Let us act like rational businessmen. Let us go into the kitchen, sit down with your lawyer, and talk about a simple extension. We can restructure the commercial debt right now. Just give me 60 days, brother, and I will unlock my investor capital and make you completely whole with a massive premium." I stared at him, letting his hollow promises hang in the dead air. I looked down at the three of them groveling at my feet with eyes like absolute ice. I systematically dismantled their pathetic defenses, using the very weapons they had forged against me over the last month. "You have no investor capital, Jamal," I said, my voice calm level and cutting through the room like a frozen blade. "You are completely broke. Your leased sports car was repossessed 3 days ago. Your seed money was $50,000, stolen by my ex-wife, which you blew on luxury hotels and dry-aged steaks. You are a massive fraud, and we are absolutely not brothers." I turned my piercing gaze back to my mother, who was still weeping openly into the marble floor. "Family sacrifices for family right?" I asked, my tone dripping with lethal irony. "Isn't that exactly what you told me at that cheap diner, Patricia? You demanded that I ruin my financial future and take on massive personal debt to save Jamal. Well, now I am asking you to sacrifice your comfort for my corporate portfolio. I am just following your exact advice." I slowly shifted my attention to my father. He shrank back under my stare, looking like a frightened, broken old man in a rented tuxedo. "And you, Richard, you stood in this exact room 30 days ago and told me that failures do not deserve to live here. That was your golden rule. You backed a complete con artist, you liquidated your entire life savings to pay for this ridiculous fake party, and you defaulted on a massive predatory loan. You failed spectacularly, and by your own flawless logic, you no longer deserve to stand on my property." Finally, I looked at Stephanie. She had backed away from the chaos and was cowering near the base of the grand, curving staircase, her face pale with absolute terror. I reached into the inner breast pocket of my tailored suit jacket and pulled out my smartphone. When I originally purchased this house, I had personally wired it as a state-of-the-art smart home. My device was still seamlessly synced to the integrated Bluetooth sound system. I opened my encrypted audio files and selected the specific recording I had saved earlier in the week. I tapped the screen and cranked the master volume to maximum. The pristine theater-quality speakers embedded invisibly in the high ceiling roared to life. Stephanie's unhinged, screaming voice blasted through the entire house, bouncing off the walls with terrifying, crystal-clear fidelity. A real man would sell his own organs on the black market to save his sister from going bankrupt. The recording of Stephanie screamed through the mansion, the venomous words filling every single corner of the grand foyer. "I hate you! Mom and Dad hate you! I hope you die alone in a gutter because you are absolutely dead to us!" The horrible recording echoed in the deafening silence. The two heavily armed sheriffs stood by the open front doors, their expressions completely stoic as they watched the family utterly self-destruct. Stephanie buried her face in her trembling hands, letting out a muffled scream of pure humiliation as her own abusive words were perfectly weaponized against her. I locked eyes with my sister as the digital echo faded into the cold night air. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, smoothly adjusting the cuffs of my crisp white shirt. "I am completely dead to you," I repeated calmly, letting the absolute finality of the statement settle over the ruined room. "And dead men do not grant loan extensions. You have exactly 25 minutes left to pack your bags before the sheriffs drag you out by your wrists." The mass exodus of Jamal's fake investors had created a massive bottleneck just beyond the front steps. The single rented teenage valet was completely overwhelmed by the sudden stampede of panicked minor businessmen and terrified socialites demanding their luxury vehicles all at once. Because of the traffic jam in the expansive driveway, a small, morbidly curious crowd had formed just outside the open double doors of the grand foyer. They were trapped on the front porch, craning their necks to watch the magnificent, catastrophic train wreck unfolding inside my house. Standing right at the front of that lingering crowd was Monica. She had initially bolted for the door the second the lead sheriff announced the foreclosure, dragging her loud cryptocurrency investor boyfriend by the wrist to escape the immediate humiliation. But when Attorney Sterling had dramatically revealed my true identity, Monica had stopped dead in her tracks on the marble threshold. She had turned around and watched with wide eyes as I shed the oversized, faded jacket to reveal the $5,000 bespoke Italian wool suit beneath. She had listened closely as I handed my matte black business card to Jamal and declared absolute ownership of Apex Asset Management. The gears in her highly calculated, opportunistic brain shifted with blinding speed. The flashy crypto boyfriend standing next to her suddenly looked like a cheap, useless imitation of wealth compared to the cold, hard, undeniable power I was currently radiating. I was not just a stagnant supply chain analyst anymore. I was a ruthless, commanding, multimillionaire who held the deed to a massive estate and the financial power to crush my enemies with a single phone call. Monica made her choice instantly. She abruptly dropped her boyfriend's hand, completely ignoring his confused protest. She pushed her way past a stunned real estate developer, stepped confidently over the marble threshold, and walked right back into the dead silent foyer. I watched her approach, my expression completely unreadable. She walked right past my sobbing mother and my paralyzed father, treating them like inconvenient pieces of furniture that were simply in her way. She stopped a few feet away from me, her eyes darting quickly over the expensive, masterful cut of my suit and the heavy platinum watch gleaming on my wrist. Then, Monica initiated the performance of a lifetime. She blinked rapidly, forcing a pool of shimmering, highly manufactured tears into her wide eyes. Her lower lip began to tremble with perfect, practiced precision. She clasped her hands together in front of her chest, projecting an aura of innocent, heartbroken vulnerability that she absolutely did not possess. "Liam," Monica whispered softly, ensuring her voice carried just enough for the lingering crowd at the door to hear her dramatic plea. "I am so sorry. I see it all clearly now. I was manipulated by your parents. Richard and Patricia poisoned my mind against you. They told me horrible lies about your ambition and your future. I was confused, and I made a terrible mistake by leaving you. But looking at you right now, standing here, as the man you were always meant to be, I realize I never stopped loving you. We can fix this, Liam. We can start over." For a moment, the only sound in the grand foyer was the ragged, panicked breathing of Jamal. The audacity of her pivot was so spectacularly shameless that it was almost impressive. She had stolen from me, gloated about my downfall in a public parking garage, and secretly invested her stolen money into my fake brother-in-law's non-existent company. Now that her ridiculous investment was completely gone, and I was holding all the cards, she was perfectly willing to throw my parents entirely under the bus to secure her own financial future. I looked at her trembling lip and her fake tears. And then I laughed. It was not a warm or forgiving laugh. It was a dark, echoing, deeply cruel sound that bounced off the high, vaulted ceilings and sent a visible shiver down Monica's spine. The fake vulnerability instantly vanished from her face, replaced by a flash of genuine uncertainty. "You want to fix this?" I asked, a dangerous, razor-sharp smile spreading across my face. "You want to talk about being manipulated, Monica. That is incredibly fascinating, considering the very specific conversation we had just a few weeks ago." I reached back into the inner breast pocket of my tailored suit jacket. I had just put my smartphone away after utterly destroying my sister, but it was time to bring it right back out. I unlocked the screen, swiped past the folder containing Stephanie's abusive voicemail, and opened a different, highly secured, encrypted file. "Do you remember the parking garage outside the courthouse on the day our divorce was finalized?" I asked, calmly, holding the phone up so she could see the screen. "You were so incredibly proud of yourself that afternoon. You just could not resist taking a victory lap at my expense." Monica's eyes widened in sudden, absolute terror. The color violently drained from her meticulously contoured face, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll. She took a frantic step backward, her designer heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. I tapped the play button. The audio routed instantly through the mansion's pristine, state-of-the-art Bluetooth speakers, projecting her voice with devastating clarity. "You really thought I only had that small checking account?" Monica's own smug, arrogant voice echoed loudly through the grand foyer. "I hid $50,000 in a private offshore account months before I filed the papers. You paid for my new life, Liam, and the judge did not suspect a single thing. You are so incredibly stupid." The recording stopped, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its wake. The trap had flawlessly sprung for the second time that night. Monica froze completely. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an accelerating freight train. Her mind was frantically trying to process the catastrophic legal implications of what had just been broadcast to a room full of witnesses and two heavily armed county sheriffs. Hiding marital assets during a divorce proceeding was not just a minor civil infraction. It was textbook perjury and severe financial fraud. A collective murmur of profound shock and deep disgust rippled through the crowd of wealthy guests lingering by the open front doors. The high society women Monica had been desperately trying to network with all evening were now looking at her like she was a pile of garbage on the sidewalk. They pointed at her, whispering harshly to one another, making sure words like gold digger and fraud carried clearly across the entryway. The loud cryptocurrency boyfriend took one look at the two sheriffs. The officers had shifted their stances, staring directly at Monica with deep professional interest after hearing a blatant confession to a felony broadcast over a premium sound system. The boyfriend immediately wanted absolutely nothing to do with her. He dropped his expensive cocktail glass onto the porch, turned around, and sprinted down the driveway, completely abandoning her to the authorities. "You committed perjury in a court of law," I said softly, stepping closer to her frozen figure. "And then you took that stolen $50,000 and handed it directly to Jamal, hoping to strike it rich on a fake tech startup. You played yourself, Monica. You have absolutely nothing left, and I am going to make sure my legal team forwards that exact audio file to the judge, who finalized our settlement first thing tomorrow morning." Monica opened her mouth to speak, to beg, to try and spin another web of lies, but no words came out. She was completely broken, utterly humiliated in front of the high society crowd she so desperately wanted to belong to. I reached into the front pocket of my tailored charcoal trousers. My fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper I had been saving for this exact moment. I pulled it out and snapped it open with a sharp flick of my wrist. It was a crisp, brand new $100 bill. It was the exact same denomination Jamal had violently thrown at my chest on the day I was evicted, the very same day Monica had stood in the pouring rain and laughed at my pain. I held the bill out in the space between us. Monica stared at it, her eyes welling with real, panicked tears this time. I opened my fingers and let the money fall. The crisp bill fluttered through the air, landing gently on the imported marble floor right next to the toe of her expensive designer heels. "Take an Uber," I said coldly, my voice devoid of any human empathy. "You are trespassing on my property." Monica stared at the crisp $100 bill resting against the toe of her expensive designer heel. The sheer, crushing humiliation finally broke completely through her thick, narcissistic shell. She snatched the money from the floor, turned on her heel, and practically sprinted down the marble steps. The lingering crowd of wealthy socialites parted for her like she was a highly contagious disease, their harsh, mocking whispers following her all the way down the long driveway into the dark. She was entirely removed from the board. The lead sheriff checked his heavy tactical watch, his expression completely devoid of any patience. His booming voice returned, cutting sharply through the hysterical whimpers of my mother. "You have exactly 20 minutes remaining," the sheriff announced loudly. "I strongly suggest you stop crying and start packing your personal items. Anything left inside this property at the end of the countdown legally belongs to Apex Asset Management." This second warning finally mobilized the sheer, undignified panic I had been waiting for. Richard scrambled to his feet, slipping slightly on the expensive caviar smeared across the pristine marble tiles. He grabbed Patricia by the arm, hoisting her up with zero gentleness. "We have to get the silver," Richard barked, his voice frantic, hollow, and completely stripped of its usual arrogance. "Patricia, grab the safe key, right now. Get the artwork. We cannot leave the valuables for him." They stumbled toward the formal dining room, two pathetic scavengers desperately trying to loot their own sinking ship. Jamal, however, had a completely different set of priorities. I watched his panicked eyes dart wildly around the grand foyer. He looked at the two heavily armed sheriffs blocking the front exit. He looked at Attorney Sterling, who was calmly locking his leather briefcase. He looked at me, radiating absolute impenetrable authority in my bespoke Italian suit. Jamal was not a smart man, but he possessed the primal, intensely selfish instincts of a cornered rat. He realized instantly that there was absolutely no fixing this catastrophe. Apex Asset Management was never going to negotiate. The authorities were already heavily involved. If he stayed in this house for one more minute, he was not just facing a humiliating eviction. He was facing a massive federal fraud investigation, severe perjury charges regarding his fake corporate loans, and the terrifying reality of millions of dollars in insurmountable predatory debt. While Stephanie was still cowering near the base of the grand staircase, completely paralyzed by the violent destruction of her fake reality, Jamal slowly backed away into the shadows of the hallway. He did not say a single comforting word to his wife. He did not offer to help her pack a bag. Once he was safely out of the direct line of sight of the sheriffs, Jamal turned and sprinted up the back servant stairs, taking them two at a time. I knew exactly where he was going. My smart home security system fed the live camera feeds directly to my encrypted phone, but I did not even need to look at the screen to know his script. He was tearing through the master bedroom suite. He bypassed the heavy designer luggage entirely. He went straight for the custom walk-in closet. He frantically ripped open Stephanie's velvet-lined jewelry drawers. He shoved her diamond tennis bracelets, her heavy gold necklaces, and the expensive vintage pearl earrings she had inherited from our grandmother directly into his deep suit pockets. He grabbed the heavy diamond-encrusted luxury watch he had bought with my stolen money. Finally, he snatched the electronic key fob to Stephanie's remaining luxury SUV off the marble vanity. He was methodically stripping her of every single liquid asset she possessed. Jamal did not bother coming back down the main staircase to face the music. He bolted down the secondary hallway leading straight to the attached multi-car garage. The heavy, insulated fire door slammed shut behind him, the loud, metallic sound echoing sharply enough to finally snap Stephanie out of her catatonic state. "Jamal," Stephanie called out, her voice shaky, weak, and pathetic. She pushed herself up from the floor, leaning heavily against the ornate wooden banister for support. "Jamal? Where are you? The police said we only have 15 minutes left. We need to pack the Louis Vuitton trunks. We need to call a lawyer." The deep, mechanical hum of the massive garage doors opening was her only answer. Then the aggressive, terrifying roar of a high-performance engine violently shattered the quiet suburban night. It had started to rain, a heavy, driving downpour that perfectly mirrored the miserable night they had gleefully kicked me out onto the street. The massive garage doors fully retracted, exposing the interior to the violent, freezing weather. Stephanie scrambled toward the front bay windows, her eyes wide with fresh, absolute terror. She watched through the expensive glass as her luxury white SUV shot backward out of the garage. The heavy tires spun violently on the wet concrete, screeching loudly and kicking up a thick spray of rainwater and loose gravel. Jamal did not pause to check the rearview mirrors. He did not care who or what was in the way. He violently threw the transmission into drive, stomped his foot heavily on the accelerator, and launched the massive vehicle down the long, winding driveway. "No!" Stephanie shrieked the raw sound, tearing roughly from her throat. She completely abandoned any remaining shred of her cultivated high society persona. She threw open the heavy oak front doors, pushed past the stoic sheriffs, and sprinted out into the driving rain. "Jamal, come back here!" she screamed, her shrill voice completely lost in the roaring wind and the aggressive pounding of the storm. She chased the bright red taillights down the dark driveway, her expensive silk cocktail dress instantly clinging heavily to her frame, completely soaked by the freezing rain. Her designer heels slipped dangerously on the slick, wet pavement. Jamal did not even tap the brakes. The white SUV merged violently onto the main road, disappearing rapidly into the dark, stormy night without a single backward glance. He had stolen her remaining jewelry, stolen her luxury car, and left her, entirely alone, to face the catastrophic financial ruin he had single-handedly created. Stephanie took 3 more frantic, desperate steps before her ankle twisted sharply on the wet asphalt. She pitched forward, crying out in sudden physical pain, and collapsed heavily into the thick, freezing mud lining the manicured front flower beds. She did not even try to get back up. She lay there in the pouring rain, her beautiful, incredibly expensive dress completely ruined, her knees sinking deep into the cold, filthy dirt. The horrifying, inescapable truth finally crushed the very last of her delusions. The man she had proudly chosen over her own flesh and blood, the man she had loudly built an imaginary tech empire with, was nothing but a cheap, cowardly con artist. He had just abandoned her to face millions in predatory debt, a brutal federal investigation, and absolute crushing homelessness. I walked out onto the dry, covered marble porch, wrapped securely in my flawless $5,000 suit, and watched my sister sobbing hysterically in the mud. The heavy, freezing rain continued to batter the manicured front lawn, washing away the very last remnants of Jamal's fake tech empire. I stood perfectly dry under the expansive covered porch, my hands resting comfortably in the pockets of my tailored charcoal trousers. I watched Stephanie, sobbing in the thick mud her expensive silk dress ruined, her entire life completely shattered by the man she had proudly chosen over me. The violent roar of Jamal's stolen luxury SUV faded entirely into the distance. leaving only the relentless sound of the storm. Inside the grand foyer, the lead sheriff's tactical watch beeped sharply. The sound was small, but in the dead silence of the ruined gala, it sounded like a final judge striking a gavel. "Your 30 minutes are officially up," the lead sheriff commanded, his voice echoing with absolute finality. "Step away from the furniture. Everyone out of the house, right now." I turned my head slightly, watching the final act of this glorious tragedy unfold through the open oak doors. Richard and Patricia were frantically stumbling down the grand curving staircase. They were a complete mess. Richard had entirely abandoned his rented tuxedo jacket. His dress shirt was untucked and soaked with terrified sweat. Patricia was hyperventilating, clutching a handful of expensive jewelry she had managed to scrape out of the master safe before the clock ran out. They had assumed, in their profound arrogance, that they would simply load their designer luggage into a hired moving truck when the time came. But Richard had liquidated his very last emergency fund to pay for the professional valet service, the imported caviar, and the live string quartet. He did not have a single dollar left to his name. His bank accounts were overdrawn. His credit cards were completely maxed out from funding Jamal's delusion. There was no moving crew coming. There was no luxury transport waiting to whisk them away to a comfortable hotel. "You cannot take the hard-sided luggage," the second sheriff instructed sharply, stepping in front of Richard to block his path to the front door. "You have no vehicle to transport it, and you cannot leave personal property blocking the public sidewalk. You carry what you can physically hold in your hands. Everything else stays inside the property." Richard stared at the officer, his face completely pale. "How are we supposed to carry our clothes?" he demanded, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "We cannot just carry armfuls of clothing into a thunderstorm." The lead sheriff did not argue. He simply walked over to the catering station that had been abandoned by the terrified waitstaff. He reached under the draped table and pulled out a heavy cardboard box. He ripped it open and pulled out a handful of thick, industrial black trash bags. He walked back across the marble floor and shoved the empty plastic bags directly into my father's shaking chest. "Bag it up and get out," the sheriff ordered. "You have 60 seconds before I put you both in handcuffs for criminal trespassing." The sheer, beautiful poetry of the moment was almost too much to process. I watched the arrogant patriarch of my family, the man who had gleefully watched me pack my life into garbage bags while a fake billionaire threw a $100 bill at my face, fall to his knees on the marble floor. Richard and Patricia frantically began stuffing their expensive designer clothing, their silk ties and their cashmere sweaters into the heavy black plastic trash bags. Patricia was weeping uncontrollably, her tears mixing with the smeared makeup on her face, as she shoved her Prada dresses into the identical garbage bags they had forced me to use. When they finally stood up, the transformation was complete. They were no longer the wealthy, untouchable suburban elites they had pretended to be. They were broken, humiliated vagrants, dragging their entire lives in plastic sacks. The sheriffs physically escorted them toward the front doors. Richard and Patricia stepped over the marble threshold and out onto the covered porch. The freezing wind immediately hit them, blowing the heavy rain aggressively against their faces. They stopped right next to me. I did not move an inch. I stood tall in my $5,000 bespoke suit, the heavy platinum watch gleaming on my wrist. Richard looked at me. His eyes were completely hollow, stripped of every single ounce of the toxic pride he had weaponized against me my entire life. He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps to beg one last time, or to offer a pathetic apology he did not actually mean. But he looked at the cold, unyielding ice in my eyes, and the words died in his throat. He looked down at the black trash bag clutched in his trembling fist, finally understanding the absolute crushing weight of his own karma. He looked away, his shoulders slumping in total defeat. He stepped off the dry porch and out into the violent storm. Patricia followed closely behind him, dragging her heavy plastic bag down the stone steps. The sharp edge of a stone caught the bottom of her bag, ripping a jagged hole in the plastic. A designer silk scarf spilled out onto the wet driveway, instantly trampled into the mud by her own dragging feet. She did not even stop to pick it up. She just kept walking, her head bowed against the driving rain. They reached the flower beds where Stephanie was still collapsed in the mud. Richard reached down, grabbing my sister by the arm and roughly pulling her to her feet. Stephanie looked like a drowned rat. Her expensive dress was completely ruined, heavily stained with dark dirt and freezing water. She was shivering violently, her eyes vacant and traumatized from Jamal's brutal abandonment. Together, the three of them began the long, agonizing walk down the winding asphalt driveway. I turned away from the storm and walked back into my grand foyer. The sheriffs were doing a final sweep of the rooms, ensuring the property was completely vacant. I walked over to the abandoned wet bar in the corner of the living room. The caterers had left a bottle of incredibly expensive vintage red wine uncorked on the counter. I picked up a pristine crystal goblet and poured myself a generous, deep red measure. I walked back out to the front porch, the heavy oak doors standing wide open behind me. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the expensive wine. The rich, complex flavor bloomed perfectly on my tongue. It tasted exactly like absolute victory. I stood in the dry warmth of my property and watched the people who had tried to destroy me endure their walk of shame. I watched them struggle against the freezing wind, their heavy black trash bags slipping from their freezing fingers. I watched them stumble in the dark, completely stripped of their wealth, their home, and their dignity. I felt absolutely no pity for them. I felt zero regret. I had not forced them to leverage their house. I had not forced them to back a con artist. I had not forced them to throw me out into the street. They had built this massive, inescapable trap entirely by themselves, driven by their own blinding greed and toxic arrogance. I simply bought the lock and threw away the key. I took another sip of wine, leaning comfortably against the thick stone pillar of my front porch. I watched them reach the end of the long driveway. The street lights flickered in the storm, casting long, pathetic shadows behind them. They stepped off my property and onto the public sidewalk, dragging their garbage bags behind them. They did not look back. They kept walking into the dark, swallowed entirely by the freezing rain and the devastating consequences of their own actions. The lead sheriff stepped out onto the porch beside me. "The property is clear and legally secured, Mr. Williams," he stated professionally. I nodded, taking one final look at the empty dark street. "Thank you, officer," I replied smoothly. The sheriffs walked down the steps to their patrol cruisers. I stepped backward over the marble threshold, taking the warmth of the victory inside with me. I reached out, grabbed the heavy brass handles of the custom oak doors, and pulled them shut. The lock clicked into place with a heavy, satisfying thud. The house was finally quiet, and it was entirely mine. The heavy lock clicked into place with a satisfying, permanent thud, echoing loudly in the massive foyer. The house was finally quiet, and it was entirely mine. I stood in the dead center of the imported marble floor, breathing in the pristine, conditioned air that was no longer polluted by the toxic presence of my family. I did not celebrate with a loud party or a chaotic gathering. I simply walked through the grand empty halls of my $12 million estate, turning off the blinding crystal chandeliers one by one, letting the peaceful, wealthy silence completely wash over me. I had successfully executed the most ruthless, calculated eviction imaginable, reclaiming my property and my dignity in a single, devastating night. But the absolute best part of my meticulously planned revenge was not the night of the eviction itself. The true, undeniable satisfaction arrived slowly over the following weeks, as the brutal, inescapable reality of their karma finally settled over them. The updates regarding their spectacular downfall rolled in like clockwork, delivered precisely to my desk by a team of highly paid private investigators I had kept on retainer. I wanted to ensure my investments were completely secure, which meant verifying that the people who tried to destroy me were entirely neutralized. It started with my sister. The massive predatory commercial loan Jamal had confidently taken out to fund his ridiculous fake lifestyle was legally tied to her name as a co-signer. When Jamal violently abandoned her in the driveway, the aggressive creditors immediately descended on Stephanie like starving wolves smelling blood. Within 14 days, she was forced into a devastating, extremely public bankruptcy. The arrogant high society influencer who once sneered at my cheap clothes and proudly told me to die in a gutter now works the late night shift at a greasy, highly depressing fast food drive-thru off the interstate highway. I actually drove past the location once late at night in my newly purchased matte black luxury sedan, keeping my tinted windows rolled up just to observe the wreckage. She was wearing a cheap, unflattering polyester uniform that smelled permanently like old frying oil. She looked 10 years older, completely exhausted, aggressively dodging hostile phone calls from ruthless debt collectors while handing out cheap, soggy fries to exhausted long-haul truckers. Her former country club friends occasionally pull into her lane, recognizing her instantly, loudly laughing and taking humiliating photos of her to post on social media. She has absolutely nothing left of the fake empire she proudly sacrificed her own brother to build. Richard and Patricia did not fare any better in the vicious aftermath of their greed. Their spectacular, highly public fall from grace was the absolute hottest gossip at their precious country club for exactly 3 days, right before their elite memberships were permanently and loudly revoked for massive unpaid dues. The wealthy friends they had desperately tried to impress completely abandoned them overnight, blocking their phone numbers and intentionally crossing the street to avoid them in public. Stripped entirely of their stolen wealth, their fake social standing, and their false dignity, my parents were forced to rent a cramped, severely moldy, one-bedroom apartment on the absolute worst, most dangerous side of town. The toxic, highly manipulative dynamic that had always simmered just beneath the surface of their polished marriage finally exploded in that tiny, suffocating space. They spend their miserable days bitterly resenting each other, constantly screaming through the thin, peeling drywall about whose fault it was they lost the beautiful mansion. They are completely estranged from Stephanie. My sister blames them entirely for forcing her to marry a worthless con artist, and they aggressively blame her for bringing the fraud into their pristine home. Their precious family unity completely disintegrated the very moment the stolen money ran out. They are trapped in a miserable prison of their own making, eating cheap canned soup rotting away in a damp apartment with absolutely zero hope of a comfortable retirement. But the most satisfying, legally devastating collapse belonged entirely to Monica. The absolute audacity of my ex-wife knew zero bounds. A mere 10 days after I kicked her off my porch with a $100 bill, I received a thick, aggressive stack of legal documents at my corporate office. She had somehow found a desperate, highly unethical attorney willing to file a massive civil lawsuit against me, loudly demanding a retroactive 50% cut of my massive $12 million asset portfolio. She claimed in her official court filing that I had maliciously hidden my vast wealth during our divorce proceedings to intentionally deprive her of the luxury lifestyle she inherently deserved. She walked into the preliminary mediation hearing wearing a brand new, highly expensive designer suit she had obviously bought on predatory credit. She flashed a smug, deeply triumphant smile at me from across the polished mahogany table, genuinely believing she had brilliantly backed me into a lucrative corner. I did not even bother speaking to her. I simply sat back in my heavy leather chair and let Attorney Sterling completely dismantle her entire life. Sterling did not just submit my flawless corporate financial records. He calmly placed a small, digital audio recorder on the table, pressed a single button, and played the crystal clear file from the courthouse parking garage. Monica's own arrogant voice filled the quiet, highly professional mediation room, loudly bragging about the $50,000 in marital assets she had secretly hidden in an offshore account before filing our official divorce papers. The color violently drained from her meticulously made-up face, so fast I thought she was going to pass out directly onto the expensive table. Her own sleazy attorney physically recoiled from her in absolute horror, instantly realizing his client had just committed textbook perjury and massive financial fraud on the official legal record. Sterling did not just stop the frivolous lawsuit, he instantly filed a devastating multi-million-dollar countersuit for severe financial fraud, bad faith litigation, and intentional marital theft. The angry judge who heard the original divorce case was absolutely furious when the hard evidence hit his desk. Monica lost absolutely everything in a matter of days. The massive legal fees and the immediate crushing financial penalties completely bankrupted her. The elite corporate real estate firm she proudly worked for fired her on the spot the moment the felony fraud charges became public record, not wanting a known thief handling their highly sensitive client accounts. She is currently drowning in insurmountable debt, facing potential federal jail time, and completely unemployable in her chosen professional field. And then there was Jamal. He did not make it very far with Stephanie's stolen vintage jewelry and her massive luxury SUV. The local authorities had flagged the expensive license plate the second Sterling reported the grand theft auto. State troopers aggressively intercepted him 3 days later, attempting to cross the state line into Nevada under the cover of darkness. He tried to run a heavily armed police roadblock, completely panicked, and drove the stolen vehicle directly into a deep, muddy ditch. He was aggressively pulled through the shattered driver window, violently thrown onto the wet asphalt, and immediately arrested on a massive, inescapable list of federal felony charges, including wire fraud, grand larceny, and felony flight. I requested a copy of his official police report. Staring at his bruised, completely terrified face in the digital mugshot provided the absolute perfect closure to my story. He is currently rotting away in a maximum security county jail cell, completely unable to afford a decent defense lawyer, waiting to face a ruthless federal judge who is specifically known for handing down maximum sentences to arrogant financial predators. With my enemies completely neutralized and the toxic debris of my past finally swept away, it was time to reclaim my sanctuary. The $12 million estate was legally mine, but the physical interior still carried the foul, lingering stench of my family's profound arrogance. I did not waste a single second. The very next morning, I hired an elite, top-tier team of commercial contractors. I handed the highly recommended foreman a massive, unlimited budget and a very specific set of ruthless instructions. I wanted absolutely every single trace of Stephanie and Jamal violently ripped out of my house before the end of the week. The demolition phase was incredibly therapeutic. I stood in the grand foyer with a hot cup of black coffee and watched with immense satisfaction as a crew of heavy-set workers took massive steel sledgehammers to the cheap, tacky modifications my sister had proudly installed. They completely shattered the ridiculous mirrored walls she had forced into the formal dining room, sending the glass crashing down onto the protective tarps. They ripped up the gaudy imitation silk carpets she had laid down in the master suite, exposing the beautiful, original hardwood beneath. They completely dismantled the highly unstable, poorly constructed shelving units Jamal had bolted into the custom walk-in closets. Every single loud crash of a sledgehammer breaking through the cheap plaster felt like an absolute victory lap. Once the infection was completely cleared out, the true restoration began. I spent weeks meticulously selecting the absolute finest materials to bring the massive estate back to its former, undeniable glory. The crowning achievement of the entire massive renovation was the central kitchen. Patricia had bitterly complained about the original layout, constantly whining that it was not flashy enough for her fake high society friends. I completely gutted the entire space and rebuilt it from the ground up. I installed massive, custom-built oak cabinetry, selecting the heaviest, most durable wood available on the commercial market. The rich, dark grain of the solid oak perfectly reflected my own hard-won peace and permanent stability. I topped the massive central island with thick, indestructible black granite. I did not build this kitchen to impress fake investors or to host shallow, meaningless cocktail parties. I built it for myself, creating a completely unshakable foundation for the rest of my life. When the heavy dust finally settled and the contractors packed up their expensive tools, the house was no longer just a high-performing real estate asset. It was a true home. And a true home is meant to be shared with the people who actually matter. I did not host a massive catered gala. I did not hire a professional valet service or rent expensive crystal glasses to impress shallow strangers. Instead, I threw a quiet, highly genuine backyard barbecue on the massive stone patio overlooking the perfectly manicured rear gardens. The guest list was incredibly small, highly exclusive, and completely devoid of any toxic blood relatives. Attorney Sterling was the very first person to arrive, trading his usual intimidating legal suits for a comfortable linen shirt. We stood by the massive outdoor grill, laughing loudly about the look of sheer, absolute terror on Monica's face during the mediation hearing. I invited my loyal work colleagues, the sharp, dedicated supply chain analysts who had seamlessly covered my corporate shifts and fiercely protected my professional reputation when my personal life was violently falling apart. I invited the true, steadfast friends who had shown up for me when I was completely broken. These were the highly loyal individuals who had brought me hot meals and offered me a comfortable couch when I was forced to sleep in a cheap, depressing motel by the highway. There was no fake posturing. There were no desperate lies about phantom tech startups or hidden offshore accounts. We ate thick, perfectly seared steaks, drank cold, high-quality beer, and enjoyed the warm, peaceful summer evening. As I looked around the expensive stone patio, listening to the genuine laughter of the people who had actively helped me rebuild my life, I fully realized what true wealth actually looks like. True wealth is not a leased sports car or a stolen diamond tennis bracelet. True wealth is absolute, untouchable peace of mind. The evening slowly faded into a beautiful, vibrant dusk. My guests migrated toward the heavy stone fire pit, leaving me alone for a brief moment near the edge of the expansive patio. I leaned against the cool stone railing, holding a glass of pristine vintage bourbon, and looked out over the massive, rolling green lawns of my estate. The setting sun cast long, golden shadows across the pristine property, bathing the massive oak trees in a warm, triumphant light. I thought about Richard freezing in his moldy apartment. I thought about Patricia crying over her lost country club status. I thought about Stephanie scrubbing grease off a fast food counter, and Jamal trading his fake silk shirts for a bright orange federal jumpsuit. They had weaponized the concept of family against me, entirely twisting it into a heavy chain designed to hold me down while they climbed upward on my back. But they fundamentally misunderstood the most basic rule of human connection. Blood absolutely does not make a family. True loyalty and deep mutual respect do. You cannot demand blind sacrifice just because you share a genetic code, and you certainly cannot use the word family as a permanent shield to completely avoid the devastating consequences of your own vicious actions. They thought throwing me into the dirt would bury me, but they didn't realize I was a seed. They wanted to strip me of my dignity, steal my assets, and leave me completely shattered on the sidewalk. Instead, Their blinding greed forced me to evolve into something utterly untouchable. By violently kicking me out of my own house, they completely removed the blindfold from my eyes. They handed me the very keys to my own empire. Have you ever had to use the law and sheer success to teach toxic family members a lesson they will never forget? Tell me how you took your power back in the comments below. Stay strong and never let anyone evict you from your own worth.